Hello again, friends! And you are our friends, and welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru right here on a winter's day. Snowed in here in New Jersey. I don't know what you are doing wherever you are, but I'm your host, the great Brian Last. And hopefully you don't get frostbite this week on the episode with this man, the leader of the cult of Cornette, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Snowed in.
Snowed in.
Snowed in. We should be lucky enough to be snowed in. I was just out in the driveway in my t-shirt because it's so warm, trying to gather up all of my garbage out of the garbage can. It was blown over in the 64-mile-an-hour wind gusts we had. We had high winds with no storm. The wind just blew.
Were you wearing your Cornette face t-shirt?
No, I was not. I was wearing a "fuck you, stay the fuck away from me" t-shirt.
Are those on sale?
It didn't say anything on it, but I had the facial expression that indicated it, whatever I was wearing. If I'd been wearing a goddamn ballet tutu, people would have seen "stay the fuck away from me" on it. And the weather report again, you're snowed in New Jersey. Okay, so tomorrow it's going to be near 80 degrees, nigh on to 80 degrees. It was 30-something on Friday. But now tomorrow it's going to be nigh on to 80 degrees, another record-setting day. Yesterday or day before, whichever it was the hottest day here in 120-something years since the hottest day ever since they've been keeping the records. And over the next 2 days, we're going to have a couple of rounds of severe thunderstorms with 2 to 3 inches of rain, and then Saturday it'll be back in the 40s. So I'd take your peaceful little fucking snow, you Northeast elite New Jersey pussy.
Northeast Elite. That'll be my promotion.
Northeast Elite Wrestling. There you go. I've just come up with another one. These ideas just flow off the top of my head. It's the new Faber that I'm eating now.
You mean fiber?
Making me flow.
You mean fiber?
Fiber.
I'm sorry. You eat fiber, not Farber or Faber. But what I was going to say is, you have All Elite Wrestling. If one of them breaks off and starts their own promotion, New Elite Wrestling, just like Japan. All new.
There you go. And then later on, you could have UWFI Elite. And
who from that promotion is going to be Maeda?
Boy, who from that promotion isn't Maeda? A guy that goes off and kicks and punches people in the face for no apparent reason. That fits most of them, either in the ring or backstage.
It is interesting when people look at the influence of Akira Maeda on professional wrestling, and of course you have to look at him, and what an amazing couple of years there. 1988, just what an amazing time for him to break away after kicking Riki Choshu in the face, and people thought that the influence was UWF, UWFI, the eventual rise of rings and pancrase and MMA in Japan. They didn't realize the real influence was American wrestlers kicking the shit out of each other on TV. Just kicking full force right in the face. Here you go.
Bam! Thank you, sir. May I have another? That's what they got out of it. Well, some people were playing chess and some people were playing checkers. But yeah, so it's rotten weather. So how much snow did you get?
They're playing in the snow. It's quiet. They can't hear me if I yell at them. God damn
There's enough snow to play in it?
Well, they're playing on the deck because there's a lot of snow out there. On one side of the house, the wind blew a little bit more.
Wait a minute. What are you talking? There's a lot of snow out back, but in the front, we got nothing. What are you, on the fucking temperate zone line?
Well, no, it's starting to melt a little bit in the driveway, but on the deck in the back, there's still a good 3 inches of snow.
That doesn't answer the question of how much you got.
Was that the question? How much we got?
I
how much you
the
want?
Question was, how much snow did you get?
I think we got like 5 inches.
Oh, fuck. That's not even enough to gather up a good snowman. Fuck, that wouldn't
it's
even...
good for a good snowball. It's wet.
Well, if you were trying to make a snowman of Robert Fuller, that wouldn't even be enough for his dick.
Well, who would do that?
Well, so certain people back in the day, he was over in Continental.
They were making snowmen of him?
You would drive down the street and there would be snowmen shaped like Robert Fuller with a big dick in people's front yards. He was so over.
Travis Heckel posted some photo I saw on Facebook before of, I guess someone bought a bootleg Nike Air Jordan and they had it looked just like Michael Jordan on the actual tennis sneaker doing the slam dunk. Except this one had a big dick hanging out.
You know the Sputnik Monroe boot story, don't you?
No, what's that?
The story, again, like all Sputnik Monroe stories, but somebody got some new boots, and the boys were making over his boots and praising over his boots, whatever the fuck. And Sputnik sits up and says, well, hell, that ain't shit. I know a place down in Mexico you can get a pair of boots with a big dick and balls on the side of them. And everybody sat there and for a second, and as somebody said, well, Sputnik, why would you want a pair of boots with a big dick and balls on the side of them? And Sputnik said, well, hell, you walk into a bar wearing those son of a bitches, you can get in a fight in 5 minutes.
Okay.
So that was Sputnik's big dick and balls boots.
Meanwhile, Billy Wicks was drinking milk and arresting people.
You're drinking milking a cow. You need to take a swig or two before you milk old Bessie, just in case she gets fresh with you. But as Travis now has so many different options to go for already, we're barely 5 minutes into the program. For the
Don't go with Michael Jordan's dick. I can tell you that.
Or potentially fucking boots with big dick and balls on the side of them.
Don't go with that either.
Don't Google the big dick and balls. But you know what? I'll just get to the point right now. You can hear many more.
There was a point to all
There
this.
was a point somewhere. Many more stories like this. If you get a Cameo personalized video message from me, which is coming up this Saturday, March the 4th at noon Eastern. They will go on sale, cameo.com/Jim Cornette, or just go to jimcornette.com because everybody goes there every day. And click on the Cameo button. It'll take you right there. It's Saturday, March 4th at noon. And we're putting another 80 up for the people who got left out at Valentine's Day because those went so quickly. And I encourage you again, if you want one in the next at least 3 months, because we got all kinds of stuff going on this spring and early summer, and I'm not going to have the chance. Hotchkiss is going to be otherwise occupied with some new projects. So get them while they're hot. And I'll tell you the story of how Sputnik got boots with dicks and balls on the side of them or whatever else you want to hear. Or potentially I'll tell you the hard truths that you might not want to hear. Can you handle the truth? Directly from me? That's the question.
The Sputnik story will be in the next graphic novel. It'll be a very graphic novel.
It'll be extremely graphic. Because, you know, and I'm going to get either Adrian Street or Luke Williams of the Sheepherders to illustrate it. They both could do great caricatures that ended up with somebody's dick being 4 feet long and be like Adrian. We were a spot show one time in some fucking high school gym somewhere in West Tennessee, and he drew this elaborate picture of Jonathan and Luke on the locker room blackboard in chalk. And they had a couple different colors chalk, which helped it out. And Luke's dick was sticking out of his tights and served, as you look at it a second time, as the flagpole for the Sheepherders New Zealand flag, this big, veined, throbbing dick. It was an amazing piece of art. I don't know what they thought when they came in for class Monday.
When you were still working small shows like that early on in schools, did wrestlers think they could just freely walk the halls and go in the classrooms and do whatever they want? Was that what was going on?
No, that's where you were supposed to be. That was the dressing room.
Oh, that was in the dress? I thought, like,
yes.
He walked into a classroom. He's like, hey, look, there's a chalkboard. I'm going to have some fun in science class.
No, hear me out. We have dressed in classrooms. And we have dressed in some schools that were very small closets. But I can tell it's been a long time since you've been goddamn school, young man. I bet I've been in a school since you have. Isn't that son of a bitch? Well, now something's beeping. Damn it. Hold on here.
What's beeping?
Oh, fuck. It's just Pizzeria Uno backing up. No, apparently Amazon has come and dropped something off. They're backing up. But nevertheless, in the athletic locker room in the high school gym, you've got the blackboard and they do the gym classes and everything. And there's things there as well. So we would actually.
Oh, they didn't do that in Long Beach. No.
Well, no, okay. Well, Long Beach, where the ritzy titsy
no, it wasn't
fancy
that. Gym
folks live,
sucked.
and the polo ponies roam free.
That's out here. That wasn't in Long Beach.
No, but I'm just saying there was, it was a local county high school gym. There was one of them in the county, and it wasn't that big. So you would dress either in the locker room, in the gym, or in a classroom somewhere, or whatever the fuck. And there was always goddamn blackboards and chalk and school supplies and pom-poms and whatever the fuck else going on.
Pom-poms, yeah.
Pom-poms.
No, when I was there, it was awful. It was just basically, if it's most of the year, it's basketball. You're just going to be inside the gym playing basketball. The gym teachers talk to each other. Or you're going to be outside playing football. And maybe at the very end of the school year, briefly, they'll let you play some softball. Sucked.
Well, you wanted to be playing hardball all that time.
Well, I can understand not letting people play hardball in school. I can understand that. And I did play a lot of hardball on weekends. But softball was great too, but it was like the last 2 weeks of school. They go, okay, we can now go play softball. Fuck.
All right, Chris Matthews. But the point is, and it depends, the region of the country depends on how the high school gyms are laid out anyway. Because I've been to high school gyms in eastern Kentucky where the population of the town was 1,200 people, and that was, the gym might hold 500 people, but then you go to some places in this part of Kentucky or southern Indiana especially, and they might have a town of 1,200 people. A high school gym seats 3,000 because now high school basketball is a thing. And in West Tennessee, high school basketball wasn't that big a thing because they were more the football folks down there. So their gyms were sometimes smaller and their outdoor football field had more seats. It just depended on what they fucking needed. What do you need today? This is your show.
This is my show.
Speaking of which, is this show now officially maybe the first one we have done where we now have an official Facebook group that we are representing, that we are leading, that we are directly involved with and are giving the beneficence of our intelligence, our experience, and our wisdom to?
I don't remember what the question started as. Is this the first episode of my show or the first episode of any show?
First episode of it. Well, this has all happened quickly. It's a fast-moving situation.
Yes.
Mood.
Milk that.
When I'm in a good mood. We have thousands of people now, not only in the group, but lining up, waiting to get in. We've only announced it on the previous my show, The Experience, just a few days ago. And this thing's exploding over here. The official Cult of Cornette Facebook group, taken away from the clutches, the grasp of the evildoers over there in Gotham City who had chosen to use their powers for bad. And no more will that be taking place. But people are now saying, well, it's taken so long to get into the thing because we got thousands of people and we're picking and choosing. You got to qualify to get in. You got to be a fine, upstanding person that uses your left and right turn indicator and doesn't badger and harass and hector and nettle and associate with people who do, other people that come here for the pure love that the Cult of Cornette members show for each other. We're not having that poisoned on this forum. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have received thousands and thousands and thousands of requests for people to join. There are several thousand people already in. We will be letting more people in, but we are taking our time and making sure that we do it right. There are rules that you will have to follow. Immediately I turned into the principal when we start talking about this.
Well, it's because we're dealing in some cases with some school children. We had a nice little class over here where everybody was getting along, making arts and crafts and singing Kumbaya with each other. And all of a sudden the problem children from across the hall, they fucking came in and the fucking evil teacher that just went drunk with power was letting them all in and they were ruining everybody's goddamn time.
Now, I will say we do have a few questions that we ask people to answer when they submit themselves for membership. If you answer nothing, you will certainly not get in.
If you answer nothing, that's what you'll get.
Exactly. If you answer some of the things and your profile's a picture of a bird and you have no friends or anything on Facebook, you may not get in. You just
wait a minute. What if it's a lonely bird?
Usually it doesn't say that. Usually it doesn't say what.
Well,
how would a bird have Facebook
and no friends? That'd be a pretty lonely bird.
How would a bird have Facebook?
Typing by the hunt and peck method?
Really? Okay. You have a good answer sometimes. You just stop me dead in my tracks.
Well, continue on down the tracks explaining how people can get into this thing and have more of this go on.
And we can have more of this after that. The official group page is facebook.com/groups/official Jim Cornette, or search for the official Cult of Cornette Facebook group. Submit yourself for membership. Answer some questions.
Present yourself.
And again, we know
walk up to the goddamn door dressed as best you can in your finest clothes with your hat in your hand, press the bell, and politely ask for admission. That's all we ask.
Again, some people, I guess, aren't paying attention to the rules because they're not in yet. One of the rules is you're not Jim Cornette, but you get some of these people like, do you want to join the group? Fuck you, motherfucker, let me in, mother. Like, they think they're you. That's what we're trying to prevent. The cosplay social media clowns, I guess we can call them. But check it out, the official Cult of Cornette. The shows are posted there. The videos are posted there. Everything going on in the universe of Jim Cornette and Arcadian Vanguard will be posted there. So if you want to keep up with everything on Facebook, do that. Lots of conversations. There are lots of clowns, but most people are behaving themselves. The ones who haven't, we bounce them right the fuck out. So don't worry about it. Join, have a good time. It may take a while. We're going through everything, but we have good moderators. We'll be adding to this team eventually, but we're making sure that we have a good crew of people inside the group.
And we're not saying that you have to come and talk about only us with everybody or whatever the case. There can be spirited discussion on animal husbandry and, is sheep fucking legal in New Zealand or whatever the topic.
We will specifically be restricting those two topics. Thank you for bringing them up. I can add them to the list now.
Oh, so we can't talk about that either?
But for example, a member of the group just posted, I guess this would be more for your taste than mine, a picture of Tudor's Biscuit World. What appears to be a couple of biscuits or a biscuit cut in half with a sausage, egg, and, I don't know, a tater tot or something on top.
Well, yeah, what the fuck's the matter with that?
I'm not saying anything's the matter with it. I'm telling you I'm giving you an example of something
what does that have to do with sheep fucking in New Zealand or animal husbandry? I've been to Tudor's Biscuit World, and all the animals on their biscuits have been dead and cooked.
This is an example, as I was saying. Here's Charlie from Starkville's bragging about some of his comics. That's right, the famous Charlie from Starkville's here in the group.
Well, right there, my God. Now we've got to hire extra security. They'll be beating the doors down. But
hey, check this out. One of the members posted this a few minutes ago. Jazz Kilson Jr., someone I guess on, looks like Instagram, says, keep CM Punk retired, and Punk replied, you liked your own comment. Bold. I'll wrestle again just to upset you. You'll watch no matter where. So that's good. That's an example of the kind of thing. Here's another thing. Matthew Byard has posted a poll. Should Jim Bryan and Stephen P. New find a billionaire and start their own promotion? 71% are voted yes, with 26% saying no and 3% saying, ha!
All right, but the point we're making is it doesn't all have to be about us or me or whatever. Not all about me. You can talk to people about whatever you want to as long as you're not being an asshole. We have put rules in place to discourage the assholery. And I still think we ought to be keeping a section for animal husbandry, but we'll get into that later on. Or potentially,
maybe
any of the other related veterinary fields that people want to get into.
Veterinary fields, okay.
Veterinary fields. It's down the road from strawberry fields. But over there, nothing is real. It's nothing to write home about. Anyway, this is your program. So we've got a new Facebook group, and you're going to get cameos this Saturday. And past that, I'm yours.
We have a lot of things we have to talk about, a lot of things we've watched. For everyone wanting a Raw review, you're not going to get it here today. You're not going to get it here today, for whoever that is.
Because we heard what happened on the show before we watched it.
But you'll hear about some of the highlights of that show this weekend on the Jim Cornette Experience, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Jim, we got so bogged down with stuff last week, and there's even more wrestling this weekend. It's amazing how much stuff we have to watch. We didn't get to watch WWE Rivals, the new season, and the first episode, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant.
Well, and actually this time of year, I mean, it's all hitting us. The WrestleMania awareness is upon us. So that's when A&E launches their new line of docudrama programming. And then AEW is trying to do whatever the fuck it is they're trying to do. So there's a lot of stuff to keep up with just there without going any deeper in the wide world of wrestling. But the one thing that I do and often do, not always, but often do enjoy about the A&E stuff or any kind of documentaries is at least it's not the new shit. At least we get to see the old shit, the stuff that people actually watched in large numbers and are still talking about. And it's refreshing in every other way except I've mentioned before when you go back and you see the people jumping up and down and the guys and they're into it and it's just it hurts my feelings when I think we don't have that anymore, but at least now, more people are getting to see it, right? So it's bittersweet. But with Hogan and Andre, this was the dream match of the modern era. And I don't know. I mean, there were maybe shit. In its time, was it bigger than Londos and Lewis? That was, what were the biggest, most publicized wrestling matches of their era? One would have to think that this would be top 2 or 3, right? Because just of the magnitude of it, I mean, there were matches all through wrestling history that drew big crowds, and Londos in the 30s, and Thez and everybody that contributed to that boom in the 50s. But this was the dream match that people wanted to see in their minds before they ever knew they'd actually get to see it, maybe more than any other, right?
I think so. We talk about so much wrestling, when we talk about, let's say, the Rock and Roll Express and the merch money in 1986 versus what it would have been today if they had the modern mechanisms and the different things that they could have done today, they would have made so much more money. Hogan and Andre, if we were looking specifically at WrestleMania 3, look at how much money that made. Look at what the payoffs were for even Heenan. And imagine that with today's money and the way of merchandising and pushing everything. It was a major event. It was a big deal. And WWE almost successfully, to anyone who wasn't an older fan, wiped the memory of any Hogan-Andre history before 1984 to build up to WrestleMania 3. Certainly, they wiped any body slam history.
Well, and remember also, was this the first, crack in the relationship maybe between Barnett and Vince because of the payoffs? Oh,
because the story is that Vince ripped up what Barnett was gonna... That yes. Barnett was handling the payoffs and Vince overruled him, correct?
And I heard that from people who were actually in the office at the time, so it's not like wrestling hyperbole. Barnett wanted to give Hogan and Andre $250,000 apiece, and that's in 1987, so what would that be today? Close. And this was, again... People say this was the biggest pay-per-view wrestling event ever, and technically it was in terms of the buy rate, the amount of people who bought it versus the amount of overall pay-per-view audience that there was at the time. And like 10% of the audience, it was never done again, bought this fucking thing. But the pay-per-view matches in the modern era, of course, gross more monies, but at that time, $250,000 was one of the what would have been a bigger payoff at that point? Anything in Japan?
I don't know if anything.
Ever.
I don't know if any single match would have had a payoff for one of the participants.
Besides Ali and Inoki, and Inoki was doing the thing because of the publicity. There was no. So that would have been alone one of, if not the biggest wrestling payoffs at the time.
And and for the record, $250 today would be approximately $658,000.
Well, there you go. Vince overruled him and gave him $750 apiece. He was that thrilled at the outcome.
That's just under $2 million today.
There you go. But it was a dream match at the time that had never been seen nationally, and we can go through and talk about how that they did succeed in the build to WrestleMania 3. They couldn't erase the memories that the Northeast fans had. It had only been 7 years since Shea Stadium, right? For the people, the most diehard fans who watched TV and etc. But this worked anyway because for those fans, the positions were reversed. Andre had been the beloved babyface. Hogan had been the heel. So technically, when Andre won at that point in time, they loved it, and it proved for them that Andre could beat Hogan. So now with Hogan the hero and Andre the despicable villain, Hogan could be in trouble for those people in the Northeast, right? And they did the match in some other places, but not in, like it was done in Southeastern when Hogan was Sterling Golden, I think, still, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was on the JYD Michael Hayes Superdome show.
It was on the JYD Superdome show, but at the same time, that was 30,000 people, but it was only in New Orleans. They didn't go around the territory with it. So I get what I'm saying is the Northeast fans really knew that there had been a previous Hogan-Andre history when the roles were reversed, but it had been years. Now, again, Hogan's the hero, the push behind him, and the national audience. Because for everybody else in the country, oh my God, this has never happened before. For the people in, Oklahoma or goddamn Minneapolis, for fuck's sake, right? Where Hogan had just been so hot. So it would have been like, there was no way to do a dream match like this in the 1970s or in the earlier territory days because every part of the country disagreed amongst the fans on who the greatest wrestler in the world was, and it was usually the top guy in their territory, right? And sometimes you could make a case for it. Well, it's both, but the people in one part of the country didn't want to see the same match that people in the other part of the country did. The closest thing to Hogan and Andre would have been Andre and Bruno Sammartino from 74 to 78, 79, 80. That would have been the closest thing to an untouchable dream match of the irresistible force meets the immovable object. And Vince Sr. specifically refused to do that match, even when Bruno brought it up one time. They could do Shea Stadium. And he said no, because he had the two greatest attractions in the wrestling business, both under his control, and both were the most beloved figures in the business. And he wasn't going to turn either one of them heel for the sake of one match or one program, even an all-time record breaker. And he didn't want a babyface match because still he felt that it would diminish the love that some fans had for one guy or the other to see them fight. And that was so you never got that. So this was, again, it was a natural dream match.
In the era before you had what we have today or what you had in the late 80s, even with pay-per-view and building to big events, and programs can be bigger because you're building to bigger things. I mean, that's what Dusty did too.
Right.
Would a heel turn for one of those kind of guys have been counterproductive because you would have gotten a 3-match run or something, but then it would have limited what you could do with them going forward because you don't have big shows that you're building to like that. Shea Stadium was once every several years for a decade. That was it.
Well, yes, and also, to be honest, I don't know that WrestleMania 3 would have happened, or the Hogan and Andre match would have happened, if Vince hadn't realized that Andre's days in the ring were numbered. If Andre had been it had been the same situation, but Andre was in perfect health, and Vince thought there's no reason I'm not going to be booking Andre, for another 5 or 6 years, I don't think he'd have done it, because that was kind of like the end, the admission that the end was near in hindsight, but at the same time, you're ruining the spotless, clean image that you have built and your father started building of the most recognizable face in professional wrestling since goddamn Gorgeous George, maybe even more than that. And he had been everywhere, and he had been in every magazine. He was the lone wrestler that was on the Tonight Show when nobody else could get on, or the National Talk Show, or the newspapers. They talked about him on Wide World of Sports. Andre was a phenomenon even then, but they had never even teased turning him heel or having him do anything that the fans would in any way, react negatively to. But then, not only does Vince have a new superhero, Hulk Hogan, and the build has 84, 85, 83 solid years before they go into WrestleMania 3. But everybody has talked about the condition Andre was in. He knew that he was never going to, Andre was never going to be more over as a babyface than he was already. But I don't think he would have ever turned him unless he saw that if I don't do it now, I'll never do it, because he's,
right,
physically not capable of going on much longer. And he didn't. So that's the reason that it was a no-brainer to have that match as a dream match, but the reason why the trigger was pulled on it was because of Andre's condition.
Hey, can I ask you a question? Late 86. I was going to say late 86, but really early 87. Building into WrestleMania. Did you have any idea of how big this was? Because you kind of kept up with WWF TV, but you weren't following it. You weren't a fan of it, certainly. Did you understand how big this was before it happened?
Good. Well, yes. Good, because number one, it's Hogan and Andre. And number two, it's in the Silverdome in Pontiac Silverdome. It's Detroit for our international fans. Detroit, Michigan, which is 4 hours from Toronto. The previous summer, Hogan and Orndorff had done almost 70,000 people for that fucking house show in Toronto. So, and that's why they did this. Because Detroit, again, it's not just, WrestleMania 2 was kind of bleh, right? Because they did the 3 cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. But ticket sales were or whatever, and it was split up. So even though it was a big deal, it wasn't a big deal because it was spread out. It was all over the place, didn't have a focus. But now they've got a goddamn main event in a fucking stadium again in Detroit, where they're popular, 4 hours from Toronto, which is one of the great wrestling cities in North America, and also Detroit from Indianapolis, even from here in Louisville, from Cincinnati, from Columbus, from Cleveland, from fucking St. Louis. You could get there, and it was a big match. And so, yeah, that I knew that was going to be huge. And again, they announced, what was the announced figure? 93,000, however many folks.
93,173.
Okay, well, now in modern times, everybody has found out that WWE and WWF before them inflated numbers. And that there was legitimately, we think Uncle Dave uncovered the goddamn building report at some time. There was 78,000 or whatever. It still is 80,000 fucking people. I'm not downplaying it.
They decided on the number before they announced it.
Well, that's it, because they wanted to Vince wanted to set a record. And a point I was going to make is that for years, people argued, no, they really had 93, because they thought, how can they lie about something like that? And now in modern times, when it's come out that they do exaggerate the figure or add all the fucking employees or the people parked in the Shoney's parking lot next door, however they come up with the number, they accept that now and they know that it's not a real number. But back then, for so long, people bought that number that now that's the number associated with it. But it was still fucking huge. And it's because they were in a centrally located place that they could, draw from multiple metropolitan areas within a 5-6 hour drive. And they had the biggest match that you could put together of all any personalities in wrestling, the most dominant current guy and the most dominant former guy. So that was perfect. And you can tell the panel. I love the old footage from the archives, especially non-WWF stuff, where you got, see some of the territories. But the host, Freddie Prinze Jr., and the panel is random people, and not because I don't like any of them, JBL, Devon, Natalia, Booker T. It's because none of them were there when this was going on.
They're not known for their wrestling expertise in terms of history, and they weren't there. The other problem is, I enjoy things like this, little historical looks back. Even if they're WWE and slanted history at times, some of the things I enjoy, Hogan, Andre, I enjoy. Why are these guys filmed like they're filming a conspiracy show with Jesse Ventura?
Yeah, they're
dark lights, they're huddled over the table. What the fuck is this?
They're speaking in hushed tones about, and then we planned to whack the guy. Well, and you say historically, so Freddie Prinze Jr. says it's the first huge rivalry in the WWF.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
If the WWF began in 1987, yes.
Well, yes, it was the first huge rivalry of 1987. And then Devon, they did a great job, as you said earlier, of erasing the previous Hogan and Andre program up there when Devon said, well, the Giant had never been defeated before in 15 years of wrestling. And he believes that because he grew up watching WWF, and that's what they were told. And then the 70s and early 80s footage of Andre, and they went a little deeper on this than they normally do for retrospectives, where you saw a little bit more stuff. But again, he was such a different guy in the ring until 82-ish, 3-ish maybe. But they had all territories rep. There was some world class, there was some Mid-South. Of course, Stephanie popped in to say, we were friends. I fell asleep on his lap.
They had to. That drew me into the show. As soon as that was there, I knew they were taking this seriously.
Yes. And
he was my friend. My friend. Come on.
Did we ever see her again after that? But they had footage of Hulk training. And again, it was so great that, what was his name? God damn it. Gordon Soley's son that did the film work in Florida.
Greg Soley.
Greg Soley's the one that did the film, because a lot of times from that era, late 70s Florida, you will see that they had film instead of videotape, and they slow-mode stuff, and they had the workouts that Matsuda would conduct. So they actually have Hogan training before he was anybody but a fucking schmo. And the story of Matsuda breaking his ankle and everything. But my weekly A&E appearance was a picture of Hulk squaring off against Sonny King from, I think it was from Louisville. It was either Louisville or Evansville that I took at the time. Popped up on the screen.
What do you think either one of them, Hogan or Michael Hayes, thought the night in the Superdome when Hogan flies in to wrestle Andre and Hayes is in the main event? These guys had both started in Memphis a year earlier and were real down on the cards. I mean, well, they tried with Hulk, but I mean, he was teaming up with Eddie Boulder. You're not going to be in the main events for long with that.
Well, no, he achieved his level of ability during his run in Memphis. It was still pretty awkward. They put Hulk and Eddie Boulder, his brother Brutus Beefcake for the modern fans, in an angle with Ron Bass and Pete Austin, and tried to get some sympathy on these two big muscle-headed clowns that couldn't really speak yet. And to show that they were important, Jarrett made sure to book them in the main event. And the semifinal was Wayne Ferris, Larry Latham, and Danny Davis in a 3-on-2 handicap match against Jackie and Roughhouse Fargo. Reunited for the first time.
Oh, they got Zulu'd.
In goddamn 2 or 3 years. No, but here it was even worse than that. Because it was goddamn, that was after the Tupelo concession stand brawl, right? And I think they got Memphis back up to, that night I was there, like almost 8,000 people. It had been down to 2 or whatever. But the goddamn thing is, as soon as the Fargos and Ferris and Latham and Davis finished, the people got up and walked out. And during the main event of Hogan, and they're in there green as grass. And Ron Bass and Pete Austin were not that over his heels at that point either, but you saw the people filing out. Half the crowd. It was a 15-minute match, and by the time they were over with, 4 of those 8,000 people is already gone. And Memphis never left during the main event, ever.
What do you think Hogan thought? What do you think Hogan thought of Roughhouse Fargo the first time he saw him?
Oh, they had no idea what the fuck they'd got into. They had no idea what the fuck they'd got into. But anyway, so they skipped ahead on Rivals to 1980, where Hulk goes in to the WWF as a heel with Freddie Blassie. And, the method of getting juice on Andre or whatever. But then Hulk, again, he goes back and forth between, he kayfabes if it suits his purposes, and he'll spill his guts if it makes him look good. So in this case, it's the self-deprecating Hogan. I was delusional when I was young and strong. I thought I could beat this guy. No, you didn't. But these things, the shows, they fly by with the old footage. And the talking heads of Jimmy Hart and Pat Patterson and Mean Gene, those are great because they were there and they were involved. I don't know why that this is, like you said, the fucking meeting of the Colombo family has to happen in the middle of it.
Yeah, it feels like a different show.
The whole tone and everything. It's dark. They covered Hulk and Andre in New Japan, which I didn't, think they would do from a WWF-oriented show. But did you notice, by the way,
every comment from Hulk is, I was scared of Andre, and every picture is him and Andre drinking and smiling.
Yeah, and he said later on, he kept me in line like a mentor. No, all right. But when Hogan, and think about this with Modern Eyes now. I hadn't watched the Celebration in a while. When Hogan won the title, who was the first one in pouring champagne all over his head? Andre. It wasn't because Andre was so thrilled that his brand new Japanese drinking buddy, that was orchestrated by Vince McMahon Jr. Because, again, it was the blessing. Just to make sure, Bruno ain't going to do this for me. He's not going to come out there and say, oh, Hulk Hogan, you're so great, and, whatever.
Oh, but gosh darn it. Oh, you're great.
Yeah, the most beloved wrestling personality of the previous, that was 1984, of the previous 10 years. Starting in 1974, that had ever appeared in Madison Square Garden or worked for the WWF or whatever the fuck, was the first one in line to congratulate this new guy that Vince had decided was going to be his new face. And that's a specific, because nobody else even came in for a while until Andre had been there.
If you watch it when it happened, Ivan Putski eventually comes in and other people.
Well, no, I mean, Andre was the first and he got some time, the unobstructed time. Here's this moment. Okay, now the rest of you schmoes. Go ahead. But that was
one of the cool things actually on WrestleMania 3 when you watched it, because I had a VHS, my father taped it off TV, which I never understood why, because I wasn't even a wrestling fan. I only watched a cartoon at that point. But he felt the urge to tape it, and he didn't like wrestling. And before the main event match, and this may have been the first time they ever really did this. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. Saturday night's main event. But they had for the main matches, Steamboat and Savage, Piper and Adonis, and this one, packages to show you things that led up to this. And it starts with Andre pouring the champagne over Hogan's head.
Yeah. And that, again, that was an endorsement. That was a blessing by the top guy at the time. And then later on, he had started a new story because now there's two top dogs and they coexisted for a while. And then, but in a lot of cases, that's why Vince was sending Andre to Japan so much those few years. It's not like Inoki was going to turn down Andre, the biggest star in the business, but also the whole giant machine thing and whatever the fuck, they were trying to figure out some ways to disguise the fact that Andre was deteriorating and put some smoke and mirrors and other people around him.
Hey, let me ask you a question, because obviously one of the reasons they did it, if not the main reason they did it, was because of the back injury and you can hide a brace a little bit with the singlet. What are your thoughts of heel Andre going from the trunks to the black singlet?
Well, yeah, it made sense because you've got to, again, when's the last time that somebody, well, I won't say in the modern times because all that shit happens, but Vince Sr. or Vince Jr. was most noted for when somebody switched babyface or heel, they had a completely different appearance, demeanor, tone, approach, whatever, to accentuate the darker side of whatever. So you couldn't really change Andre that much because fucking, and he wasn't going to be a fashion plate. Even if they'd make all his shit custom made and pay for it, he still probably wasn't going to wear it. He wore what he wore, right? So, but the little things, it was a little subtle thing, but there's Andre in this black singlet with Bobby Heenan, who had all the color, and there's Andre. The same thing with the attack on the Piper's Pit. Hulk was an overactor even in the 80s. Andre understood the wrestling business. Well, I'm not saying Hogan didn't, but he was just so over the top. But Andre instantly knew how to switch into a heelish demeanor from that, smiling, grinning giant that he had been for all of his life, that he probably 90% of the time didn't feel like being, right? So now he can be surly and whatever. But
and I like early surly. I like early surly Andre before he grew the big mutton chops, because by 89 that made him look. He was still scary to me as a kid. He was in the main event of the first show I ever went to, but it made him look older than he actually was.
Well, besides, Andre was actually a very good promo by the modern definition when he became a heel, as far as sounding like he meant it and being legitimate. But after 87, honestly, nothing. And maybe even the 88 main event, NBC main event match. When you look back on it now, it's only because of the time people bought it. But you look back, you see, my God, this guy can't move. They were still under the fans in those days were still under the hypnosis of it's Andre the Giant. But now you see, so I don't think anything he did really after this, you could say he was good as a heel or effective or whatever, because you start feeling sorry for him visually.
What did you think of the match at WrestleMania 3 and even the follow-up, the one on the main event? And I want to talk about that in a second, but the smart fan of the era hated the match. I mean, notoriously, Dave gave it negative whatever star, said it was the worst match. For me, for a kid like me, when I started watching the tape, I never saw it that way. I never saw it as boring. I saw it as intriguing. And I remember someone telling me years ago how they loved watching from ringside in St. Louis, and they loved watching the actual guy making faces while doing things. It wasn't like they weren't doing anything. So I guess maybe that's the way I saw Hogan and Andre. At no point did they just stop doing anything. And I saw it and I thought it was like the biggest match ever when I was a kid.
Well, it was. And
but is it a bad match just because Andre's, I mean, if they were able to hide it so that I didn't know how much pain he was in until years later, is that a bad match or is it good because what else was it supposed to be?
All of these things can be true. It depends on what you're looking at. Because again, a lot of guys today will say, well, that was the greatest wrestling match ever because it drew the most money. Well, no, both those things don't have to be true. The worst match of all time can also draw the most money. But that's a lot of guys will say, well, the object is to make money and it's a business and that way. No, it's what are you grading? Was it the biggest dream match of all time? Probably. Was it at the time the biggest grossing match of all time? Certainly. Possibly
the loudest pop of all time on decibel level.
Yeah, were both these guys the most over guys in the business for a combined 15 or 20 year period, whatever it was, from when Andre started, when Hogan was not the dominant guy anymore? Yes. Did they have the match that psychologically they exactly should have had? Yes. But would it have been exciting as a match if they were any other two people? No. Because it was a match between two personalities that did exactly what they should have done, and that those personalities were incredibly over. But it wasn't the greatest wrestling match of all time because Andre was almost crippled and Hogan was a competent worker in the physical aspect. So you didn't get Flair and Steamboat. But that doesn't mean that it was, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't mean that those other things weren't true. So it wasn't the greatest wrestling match of all time, but it had a number of other accolades going for it. Like you said, especially, that's why I don't understand today, because you were a kid and you loved it, and because you were into the guys and their personalities and the mean giant and the superhero.
How's he going to beat him?
How's he going to beat him?
How in the world is he going to beat him? Yeah.
Yes. So, but Dave, speaking for the serious fans of professional wrestling who wanted to see the great athletic display, gave it negative stars. But now, the stuff that the kids like and look at with wonderment in their eyes gets 7 stars, and the stuff that the people who are serious about professional wrestling like is C, so things have flipped. But that's the thing, is that no, they were never going to be shooting each other off and giving each other suplexes, and it wasn't going to be a thrilling exhibition of physicality. What it was going to be was a dramatic storytelling of whether or not Hogan's going to be able to beat this giant. And and then that's where, again, they've tried to call the finish into question before we get to the NBC special of WrestleMania 3. And Hogan leads the charge because it makes a great story. Well, I didn't know whether he's going to let me beat him or not. For even people who are smart to the business, now still he's got a story I can hang my hat on. And of course, it's bullshit. Unless Hulk Hogan had a heart attack and dropped dead in the middle of the Pontiac Silverdome before the match was over with, he was going to win it. And even then, I bet you they'd found out some way to roll his fucking carcass over on the top of Andre. And at the same time, where Jimmy Hart said that Hogan told him, well, Andre said he's going to call it in the ring, I believe that. I believe what he was going to call was the body slam. Now, where Hogan says it was the first time, brother, I ever went to the ring, I didn't know whether I was going to win or lose. Bullshit. But I can believe he didn't go to the ring convinced he was going to body slam him. And Lance Storm had the best take on it on Twitter, saying it's entirely feasible, but at that stage of his career and his physical shape, that Andre wasn't sure after even, however many minutes of what they did, can I go up for the fucking thing? So Andre told Hogan he'd call the slam. If he hadn't called slam, and that's what Hogan always says, slam me, brother, or boss, or whatever. Well, if it hadn't been the slam, he could have had Hogan punch him and he'd have fallen over backwards in the right place for the leg drop.
Yeah, when you see Hogan try to pick him up earlier, obviously the spot is Andre falling on top of him and having the near fall, but Andre wasn't giving him much. He wasn't able to do very much.
Well, no, at the same time, I think he was...
Plus, Hogan tore all the muscles in his back when he did that.
Well, no, he just on that first spot where I'll go to slam you and you drop on me. He's like, Andre probably figured, fuck, if I get up in the air, I have no control over how I drop on him. I'm going to squish him anyway. So he just kind of wallered over at that point. Because that's a spot you do with normal sized guys when you've hurt your back or whatever, or maybe a little bit bigger guy fall on top of me. I don't know. A lot of people did it with Andre.
It was perfect. Hey, listen, perfect finish. Place goes nuts for that body slam. And then he hits the leg drop, 1, 2, 3. Everyone's happy.
And that's, again, everybody would, if they had not turned Andre heel and they just had the Hogan and Andre match, would that have been the reaction from the fans? Or would they have possibly turned on Hogan because he'd only been around on top for 3.5 years, but we've loved this guy for most of our lives?
I don't think there was any turning on Hogan in 87. He was still so red hot.
But no, I'm not talking about, throwing bricks at him and trying to cut him on the way back to the locker room. But it wouldn't have been mass jubilation if Andre had never switched heel and they'd have just said, we're going to book the two greatest names the previous 10 years together, 15 years, whatever, and they had the dream match. Would the jubilation have been there if Hogan dropped that leg, or would the people have almost been like, oh, Andre, it's over? That kind of thing, the heartstring tug. That's why you don't have babyface dream matches that mean as much, at least, as this did.
I'll go back to Hogan and Andre in a second on the main event, but after this, Andre would work more with Hogan, he would work with Duggan, work with Jake, work with the Ultimate Warrior. Eventually, him and Haku were in a tag team against Demolition. And that's the end of Andre.
But remember now, what you just said sounded like that would be a long time. It wasn't 2 years.
It was 2 years. It was 2 years. You think maybe they should have... I shouldn't say that, because, everything they did there was, at that point, to try to make as much money as they could out of Andre. I was going to say, what about putting Andre in there with a smaller guy somehow that could just bump around for him and make him look more impressive? But I guess that at that point from Hogan on, it was more about, you're a heel now, how do we get the most out of you we can?
Well, and to be quite honest, also, it's not like they were browbeating Andre to show up for work. He didn't want to quit when they made him quit, because that wrestling was his life and he just couldn't do it anymore. So they were trying to find things, biggest name in the world. He's under contract to us and he wants to do this, trying to find things for him. But after a while, that's why was it the last run with Warrior was the 10-second jobs?
Yeah.
Where it was just it. And Vince would have never dreamed of insulting Andre by jobbing him out in the normal fashion. Well, whatever you've got left here, you're going to, lose. And all the normal matches that he had, either he won or got disqualified, or if it was a tag team match, the other guy got beat or whatever. So they had never abused that. And then finally, I think when they saw that there's nothing else he can physically do, we can't do this anymore, even if he wants to put him, try to have a match with Warrior under the best circumstances was challenging. To have a match of at that time would have been almost impossible with Andre and Warrior, but it wasn't. They were making it so quick because they weren't just making it so quick because he was in such bad shape they didn't want to stink the joint out. They really set it up almost like it was a fluke thing. Even though it happened multiple times, it was on house shows where Warrior would come in, just start hitting the ropes, clothesline, whatever the fuck, and splash before the thing ever started. So it was almost like a concession to, boss, will you do this job for this guy? But we're going to do it so quick, almost like the Buddy Rogers thing with Bruno. It's going to be so fast that people won't believe it. And that's the way they could tell it to Andre, where he would not be insulted, probably.
He had the relationship with Hogan going back to 79. He didn't have a relationship with the Ultimate Warrior, so there wasn't any trust, or there weren't any of those friendship issues. There wasn't any friendship between the two, so that affected everything. And then he would be a tag team with Haku, so Haku could work and Andre could stand on the apron for the limited matches they did as a team. The main event, Hogan-Andre with the twin referees and DiBiase.
Which they glossed over the whole switcheroo with the Hebners and everything. And they just, they blamed DiBiase correctly for bribing the referee and making a bad count, which correctly, but they didn't show the twin referees, which was the big pop of the spot. But nevertheless, the one takeaway from that, and Hogan was correct, to keep him near the ropes because he's got to use the ropes to get up. But again, the biggest takeaway from that's 1988. That was only 35 years ago. Only 35 years ago. But it seems like just a twinkling of an eye. But the viewership for the first network pro wrestling program in prime time since the 1950s was 33 million viewers. 33 million. And say what you want about, well, there was no, cable and streaming and blah, blah, blah. I don't care if there was no goddamn drive-in movies. I don't care if there was no radio. 33 million people gave a fuck enough to watch this on television.
When the Beatles debuted on Ed Sullivan, the crime rate dropped.
Yes. And the point that I'm making, though, is people's talk about the reason for lack of interest in wrestling is because, well, you got more channels, you got streaming or whatever the fuck. If there was only today 3 networks on the air, is there a wrestling program that 33 million people would fucking watch?
Well, I don't think there are wrestling stars who have the aura or the personalities of those top tier guys. I felt the same thing watching some of that Jake documentary. I don't want to get to that right now, but for that era, those guys felt like big stars. Whatever you want to say about Vince's presentation, Ricky Steamboat coming out to the ring in his karate gi felt like a big star.
And hey, well, and you mentioned also because I was working for the opposition at WrestleMania 3. Did I know it was going to be a big deal or whatever? Other people had different viewpoints. Some people into business, oh yeah, boy, it's good for the business and good for those guys. And other people are like, well, fuck, why can't that be me?
Is it true that Bill Watts saw that as, okay, it's over, I can't compete?
I do not know, to be quite honest. I never heard him say that. But at the same time, I always looked at it like, yes, I wish it was us and our wrestling is better, but I understand why that these two guys are drawing a huge fucking crowd in a stadium. Because it's fucking Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. And regardless of how good I ever am at anything I do, I ain't never going to be Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant in a stadium. So I can not get eaten up that they outdrew something that I could do. And other guys are, so it was all over the page. But But you understood why that was happening, because they've pulled the trigger on a fucking match that in our a more limited scope. It's the reason why that I can personally attest to is the reason why the Midnight Express against Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson drew money. And for that short period of time before they left, it's because people did not think they were ever going to see that match. And it was the two best heel teams. You never saw heel teams fight each other. And it was the two best heel teams that had been presented to that audience for the previous 5 years. So on a much bigger basis, Hogan and Andre were the two biggest names in the entire business that had been presented to that audience for 15 years. And they'd never had the opportunity to see it.
Well, that was WWE Rivals, Hogan versus Andre, and Jim, I'm curious, Andre going from the trunks to the singlet, do you think he had to worry a little less or a little more about manscaping?
Well, I don't think that Andre actually ever worried about any kind of scaping. You've pretty much seen he didn't go to the dentist a lot, and boy howdy, he just let hair grow wherever. And I never perused Andre's nether regions, but I'll tell you what, you mentioned them earlier. The mutton chop sideburns at one point were a thing, and also when he became a heel, and especially when he went to Japan to look even more villainous, he would often grow a beard. And now I'll have you know that more people are growing beards than ever before. At least that's what I see when I watch the news or see people walking down the street from the comfort of my own home. Everybody's got a beard. But it doesn't look like anybody knows how to take care of it. Most of the time, it just grows on their neck. Their chin and straight up, it's completely shaven. So, what you need, folks, is some help. Wherever you want to grow your hair. Now, I know down below gets all the attention. And, of course, Manscaped was founded on below-the-waist grooming for your South Pole. However, now they are traveling north because some attention is needed amongst the hair on the northern portion of your anatomy, and the folks at Manscaped are tired of every time somebody thinks about dick hair, they think about Manscaped. They want to be known for just hair, whether it's on your dick or just on other dicks that you might know. So nevertheless, guess what they got now, Brian?
Oh, I have no idea. What do they have now?
The Beard Hedger Pro Kit.
That was my first guess.
Well, you should have made it. It's the ultimate package that makes it easier than ever to craft your signature look. We're starting with the Beard Hedger itself, an elite beard trimmer. Now, I've never had a beard except for when I've neglected to shave, and so therefore I don't really know how to groom it. But apparently, it's a very involved process. From what I've seen with a lot of people, they don't know how to do it. Well, this waterproof cordless trimmer makes it snap of the fingers easy with the rotary wheel that gives you 20 hair cutting lengths, all with one guard. So basically, you apparently can have a beard anywhere from about 1/8 of an inch long to all the way down to your crotch. And that's where you'd need to get the lawnmower 4.0 involved if your beard's down to your crotch. But if you get it tied up around your bean pole down there and you stand up straight, you might fucking castrate yourself. So don't let it get that long. You know, these things can sometimes get tangled up with each other.
I didn't know that. Don't do that, and I didn't know that.
20 hair cutting links, all with one guard. Also, the Pro Kit comes with 4 dermatologist-tested formulations. And I'll have you know they held this fucking dermatologist down and they tested shit on him. Some of this shit took his skin right. No, they did. Some of it took his skin right off his fucking body.
There is no dermatologist right now who has been deprived of skin.
They told me that this is dermatologist-tested formulation. Some of it ate right through to the fucking bone, but finally they got it right. He looks like shit.
They did not tell you that.
It's going to be a long road to recovery for him, but he was the canary in the coal mine.
There was
so
no
they
canary.
can get everything right.
There is no canary. This story, no. Just once again, no. But Manscaped, yes.
Well, because they have dermatologist-tested formulations. They got the beard shampoo and conditioner. Have you been using the same shampoo on your top of your head hair as you use on your chinny chin hair? Have you?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Am I using the shampoo I use on my head on my chin?
Yes.
You're talking about the real chin, or you're being filthy again?
If your hair chin, if you're
my
if
hair
you got
chin,
hair on your chin, you got hair on your chin. Do you use the same shampoo as the hair on the top of your head? Well, silly boy, if you do, you're not supposed to, because they got beard shampoo and conditioner. They've got beard oil.
Oh, well, you got to use that.
Beard oil. Let's say, for example, your beard is not oily enough. Well, you put some of this on, and you can fry tater tots on underneath your neck.
That's not what it is. People apply beard oil, and it helps keep your beard smooth. It helps keep it conditioned, moisturized. You rub it in, you really grind it in, and
you rub it in, you grind it in.
It also promotes growth, I believe, hair growth, for those of you desperate for beards.
Well, all of us want to promote growth.
I think these things, I shouldn't make any declarative statements like that. I don't know what it does, but it's good.
Take some of this beard oil and rub it on your dick. You'll get more girls.
Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not recommended anywhere.
On the dick.
That is certainly not recommended.
Well, we don't know it. As long as you don't shove it up your ass, you ought to be able to do anything you want to with it on your body. But they've also got the beard balm. The beard, you're distracting me.
Yes.
The beard balm.
Oh.
The balm to help keep your beard calm.
You got to use that too.
And it says right here to moisturize, style, and shimmer your new beard. Plus the kit, I'm talking about the Beard Hedger Pro Kit, has 3 free gifts: a beard brush, a comb, and scissors. Well, God, you'll be able to do anything with it. As a matter of fact, everybody should go ahead now and just grow a beard, because you can sculpt shapes, and maybe you can make balloon animals out of it. You can walk around with a porcupine on your chin, or a flamingo.
What are you even talking about? How would that work?
If like you see the landscapers making the hedges into like shapes, you can do the same thing with this. They got the brush, the comb, the scissors, the oil, the balm, the shampoo, the conditioner, the waterproof cordless trimmer, beard hedger with 20 hair cutting links. Well, you can make a statue of the Venus de Milo and have room for both of her arms and legs on your chin, folks, right now. And once you've got your face looking like nobody's ever seen it before, then you must try Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0, because they're going to go right down south and do the same thing. Your nether regions will be unrecognizable, just like your face, after they get finished with you here. But right now, I'm talking right now, put us on pause and go to manscaped.com and use the code DRIVE, and you're going to get 20% off and free shipping. Manscaped.com, use the code DRIVE, 20% off, free shipping. How can you go wrong having a flamingo on your chin and an armadillo in your crotch?
There's plenty of ways to go wrong, but you won't with Manscaped.
There are a few ways that could go sideways, aren't there?
That's right. If you need a shave, our friends at Manscaped have you covered. Upstairs and down.
Brian, you had a good beard, a cultured beard, a very distinguished beard. I bet you'll never guess who had this great beard I'm talking about.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, there you go. See, Sebastian Cabot. Sebastian Cabot had a great beard. The kids could learn a few things from Sebastian Cabot.
Well, Jim, let's learn a few things, or let's have you teach us a few things. I'm going to go to the Cult of Cornette Facebook group for a few questions. We created a thread, put it up for a short period of time to get some questions in. Let's see how some of these are. Jim, this one was sent in on the Cult of Cornette Facebook group by David Sigafus.
Oh, come on.
What is
Seriously? Now, wait a minute. I thought you were screening these people. What? How did you let a guy in named David Snagglepuss?
David Sigafus, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Jim, what is the worst finisher by an NWA heavyweight champion?
Ooh, Well, let's go back and take a look. I mean, obviously, Flair's was the figure 4. We can't call that a bad finisher. Tommy Rich used the Thez press, which was named after Lou Thez. I
What
gotta
did you
be
think of
honest.
that? What did you think of the Thez press by Tommy Rich?
I gotta be honest. At first, when he was in Tennessee as a young underdog babyface, and he would use it for a surprise victory out of nowhere, it worked. But then, as it became just the thing that was taking down name after name on Georgia Championship Wrestling, But you got to think about this now. What recognized the Funks had the spinning toe hold, and that was a classic. Did Harley? Well, what now? Yeah.
Again, by the time, and things changed. By the time I was watching in the late 80s, the spinning toe hold wasn't. I don't even think I saw Terry Funk win a match with that at that point.
Well, no, but when they were NWA champions.
I don't. Again, I'm not a big Dory Funk Jr. fan. Maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, for heaven's sake! Well, what do you got against Senior? He started the whole goddamn thing.
That's true.
But did Jack Briscoe use the figure 4? Did Harley Race have a recognized finish per se? He did so many things. He did suplexes. He did the diving headbutt off the top rope.
I mean, even Thez. I mean, how often was the Thez press actually used as the finish? He didn't have a finisher, did he?
I think, as you said, that was a move that he did sometimes, but he had other finishes as well, because you didn't. I don't know that, especially in Thez's day and coming from the era that he trained in, that there was a finish, a finishing maneuver that had to be the climactic point of someone's match. Even Strangler Lewis with the headlock. He was noted for using a headlock. It won him matches, but he could win in other fashions. So, we're pretty much down to the modern era. Maybe it is the Thez press, a la Tommy Rich, that would be the weakest. I mean, who are the modern champions that we didn't pay any attention to?
Well, again, the question was about NWA champions. Well,
that's why I'm saying, who are the modern NWA champions that we haven't paid attention to?
I don't know.
Maybe some of them had a crummy finish. I don't know. But thank you, Mr. Snagglepuss.
Here's another question from the...
Or was his name Phosphorus?
His name, hold on, I got to scroll up. His name was Sigafus.
Phosphorus.
Jim, this question from the Cult of Cornette Facebook group was sent in by Marcus Rose. Do you think WWF would have still won the war had Jerry Jarrett taken over if Vince went to jail? There's an interesting what-if history. Bischoff versus Jerry Jarrett.
Well, but wait a minute. How long were they going to fucking put Vince in jail for steroid distribution?
Life.
What was the maximum? What? Come on.
Oh.
Even if Vince had gone to prison in he brought Jerry in 92. That's when the trial started. But was he acquitted 93? Help me out.
94.
94.
94 was the trial and the acquittal.
Okay. He was against Bischoff, and it it didn't work for poor Eric in 95 or 96 until he started assembling the Hall and Nash and Hogan and the ex-WWE talent. Would Vince have been out by then? I mean, I know we're all what-ifing, but that doesn't mean that Jarrett would have been leading the WWF in 1998. How long were they going to lock him up for fuck's sake? For the spurious charges that they had at that point. However, let's say that they did throw him in jail, for 10 years and Jarrett is still in charge. I think the end result is the same thing, because Jerry Jarrett would not have probably put up with as much as Vince did from talent, and may have let a few go even quicker. And basically the story was not that Vince's, the new talent that Vince was forced to use in the wake of the old talent leaving, and Vince's better business as a whole, the WWF's business structure as a company, was what made the the difference. So if Jerry Jarrett, if anything, would have started using more of the new talent and the talent that got used in the Attitude Era earlier, because they were hungrier and cheaper. And meanwhile, if Bischoff had spent more money earlier on more of the big stars that he signed without, as he just admitted, and Hulk did too last week with the NWO biography, never having a plan once they started the thing, and it might have happened quicker. Who knows? But I don't see any appreciable difference because it wasn't necessarily any one person in the WWF, being Vince, that won that war. It was more of the talent stepping up with a point to prove and a better organized machine behind them, as opposed to as Guy Coffey used to say, down south, they were running the thing like a flea market.
Jerry Jarrett in the past as a promoter, most famously probably in 77, had to adapt to things and make things happen quickly on the fly so his business would survive. But that didn't include radically changing the product he had.
No, but he could recognize talent. The thing with Jimmy Valiant, and we didn't even tell that story when we did Jerry's, not eulogy, did the tribute to Jerry. Remember in the summer of 77, he had just made Bill Dundee a top babyface, competitive with Jerry Lawler for the Southern Heavyweight title. Dundee had been a babyface tag team guy, and before that he'd been a heel tag team guy. And he'd gotten over with the people, and they liked him. As Teeny used to say, he's so cute. But he was, Jerry gave him a push, and that Lawler-Dundee feud not only made Dundee the number 2 babyface of all time in the territory for the next 40 years or whatever, but also, I think I've documented one time when we talked about that period, they worked like 12 out of 14 weeks in the main event and sold almost 100,000 tickets in Memphis alone during that time. So that was, ridiculous business even for Memphis. So then, at the same time they're finishing that program up, Elvis Presley has just died. And now Lawler's been the top heel in the company for the previous 4 years almost, and they decided to do something with the only king left in Memphis. So Lawler does the retirement. Go ahead.
And Dundee was excited because jumpsuits were half off.
Exactly. So Lawler does the deal where he's going to retire and focus on his music because he had already released records. And they were going to go a while, as long as they could, without Lawler before he came back. But the deal was Jarrett originally was going to bring in Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods to be the Southern Heavyweight Champion. And he was going to try to turn him heel, and it didn't come together, so he ended up bringing in Dick Steinborn as Mr. Wrestling. And in the early programs, they even called him Tim Woods. But the point was, for the Southern Heavyweight title tournament in Memphis, he wants to bring in big names. They have an 8-man, one-night tournament. And one of the people that he brings in is Jimmy Valiant, who was working in Indiana for Bruiser. And Jimmy Valiant had not worked in Tennessee since the fucking mid-'60s, right, when he was just breaking in. But he was a big name from the magazines and the WWF Tag Team Champions and blah, blah, blah. So there's a name in the tournament. Well, Jarrett watches the first round match, and I think he was going to have Valiant disqualified, and he's out after the first round or whatever the fuck it was. And he sees the way that Valiant's working as a heel, and he sees the way he's getting over with the people. And he called it on the fly. He sent word, fucking switch the fucking finish, put him over. And by the time that they got to the back, he said, can Bruiser give you more Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays? Give me more on you, right? And Valiant, yeah, we don't run Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Great, that's our towns. He put Valiant over in the tournament because he saw in that time, okay, what I can do with this fucking guy. It was so last minute that the tournament the next week in Louisville and Evansville, Steinborn, Mr. Wrestling, actually won. And they had to fucking do a deal where a week or two later in those towns, he dropped the belt back so that they could get Valiant Lawler started. And Valiant wins the Southern title. business is on its ass because Lawler is down. His first week there as the champion was like 3,000 people in Memphis. But they fucking continue for a couple weeks getting heat on him and then work the angle where Lawler does the concert and Valiant comes out, breaks guitar over his head. And here we go. Lawler's unretired. And for literally 4 months, almost every week, I think they skipped 2 or 3 weeks at least in Memphis and Louisville, but every week, Lawler and Valiant, stipulations, betting money, strap match, no DQ, whatever the fuck. And Valiant loved to bleed. Lawler was bleeding more. As when Lawler goes an hour with Race in Memphis for the title, the next week they come back with a 90-minute time limit, and Lawler pile drives Harley and has him covered with the referee down. Valiant runs in, breaks a bottle over his head. And Lawler not only gets juice from his head, but he blades his chest and his arm. And the people called the cops. They actually had something in the paper about it. And Lawler went to the fucking hospital and got sewed up. And it was reported he was stabbed by Jimmy Valiant and suffered superficial wounds. And they drew nothing but fucking money again for 4 months. And from that, Jimmy Valiant was made as the number 3 most popular fucking singles wrestler in the history of modern Memphis wrestling. He was over from that point on.
My question was going to be, let's say Jerry Jarrett was promoting WWF or the booker for WWF in 94, 95, Vince is away. Let's just say his product is doing better than Vince's was in 95, but it's still not lighting things up because wrestling wasn't lighting things up in 95, as you know.
Right.
All of a sudden you have an Eric Bischoff, a WCW, their budget, Nitro. It's not only up against you, it's a different kind of show. They're trying to do surprises. They're trying to make things really live. You're still taped a lot of the time. They're attacking you on TV. Jerry Jarrett or anyone else, beyond Vince McMahon, how many promoters or bookers do you think would have been able to successfully change what their product was to combat that assault? Because that's what Vince did. The WWF in 95 is different than WWF in 97, different than WWF in 99, for good or for bad. It's a complete change. Go watch that Hogan Andre stuff. 95 WWF isn't radically different in terms of aura, except, less fans. It's not as hot and the look's a little different in terms of like the ring skirt, but it felt like the same thing, the end of that era. But how many promoters would have been able to successfully deal with a WCW and a Bischoff coming at them like that?
Well, with the example you gave, he would have already been doing it. If Jerry Jarrett was, I don't know about going live, because would he have had that pull, that power, that capability? But as far as more surprises and, live as it happens, there's the fucking master of live wrestling television. Everything he tried to do or wanted to do or suggested to do was to shake that shit up. Same thing as Watts, trying to bring the Mid-South show closing babyface beat down riotous, it's breaking down and wherever. And Vince would overrule it, or Vince would change it, or Vince would re-edit the show. If Vince wasn't around, what's Jerry Jarrett going to be doing? He's going to try to bring in more exciting performers with more shocking shit. And I don't mean shocking like setting people on fire, but more surprises, more live TV as it happens, more personal issues. So he would have already done whatever he was going to be allowed to do in terms of changing it for what it actually became later on, which was, again, Monday Night Raw was originally supposed to be the live TV show where anything can happen, and was going to be, and that's what the story was going around at the time, patterned after live Memphis wrestling on television. Because not only was that people's frame of reference for a crazy, wild wrestling show, but Jerry Jarrett was actually there. So it would have happened quicker, I think. I don't know that he would have been reacting to Bischoff or whether he would have been doing it first.
Jim, another question from the Cult of Cornette Facebook group. This one sent in by Melissa Fidel. Who do you think was the more influential talent for their generation? Owen Hart or Bryan Danielson, and why?
Ooh, good question.
Interesting question.
Probably more influential for their generation, Danielson, just because I don't want to say this the wrong way. I like both guys, obviously. But there are more people in the modern era that can do, if not do Danielson stuff, do stuff like Danielson does, than there were at that time for Owen. Because the reason why Owen, remember, I was there, you were too young at that time as it actually happened, but the reason why that Owen became the breakout rookie of the year, amazing, phenomenal wrestler in his rookie year, and the best young wrestler. All those things were being said about him by the population of smart fans that existed back then. They read the newsletters or traded tapes or whatever. So it wasn't a large group as it is today, but they were all unanimous that Owen was as spectacular as anybody has seen a rookie to be. And that's because he'd grown up with all of his brothers and his dad in the business, and he'd trained in rings since he was whatever the fuck. But even though all the fans went crazy over Owen as a rookie sensation, most of the other boys did not emulate his style because most of them couldn't. You didn't have that many guys in those days in the business that were that gymnastic. The importance was size and the believability of your work or whatever. And, nobody had done that because nobody had that. Well, I'm not saying nobody. There were always gymnastic and athletically flying wrestlers, but Owen was just so smooth with everything. Even the other Hart brothers never did shit like that. Now, as Owen got a little bit older and a little bit bigger and a little bit wiser, he slowed down on some of it so that he could do it for longer and do more of it and did it where it counted. But still, he was way ahead with that kind of thing than most of the guys in the business. With Danielson influencing people to have the more Japanese-based mat work style, he actually influenced a lot of the guys to do that because you can be a normal athlete and still do that. But Owen's early work, especially as he was a rookie standout, it was so smooth for a guy that, he was better at being Owen Hart than Bryan Danielson was at being Bryan Danielson his first year in the business. Owen was more of a prodigy, and that's not knocking Bryan. It's just it took him a little while to put his look and everything together. But yeah, what do you think? Danielson has caused more wrestlers to wrestle like he does, whereas Owen, the main impact he had on the boys was they all loved him and thought he was hilarious.
I also think you have to look at Danielson's role in the rise of independent wrestling and Ring of Honor in the early part of the 2000s. He's a big part of that in terms of influence. With Owen, this may surprise you, but I actually think his most influential period for a mass audience, and I remember talking to guys in the late 90s, was him as the Blue Blazer. Because it was a brief period of time, but he was doing stuff on WWF TV that wrestling fans didn't see on American Wrestling TV. So even though he came back a few years later, first as the new generation with those hideous pants.
Oh, God, him and Coco, right?
Yeah, and then he was high energy, then he was the Rocket Owen Hart, and then he finally turned on Bret, and him and Bret was great. In terms of actual influence on the next generation of wrestlers or people wanting to be wrestlers, the Blue Blazer probably sent more people wanting to do that kind of stuff than maybe anything he did after that.
Okay, see, then there is an indictment or a description on why a lot of times people who get in the wrestling business have to be produced, because Owen Hart, the heel, the bad brother, the black sheep of the Hart family, working impeccable matches with his brother Brett, one of the best technicians in the business. That didn't say to some of these people, I want to do that. It was when he was presented as a fucking clown in a feathered cape.
I'm not talking about at the end. I'm talking about the beginning in '89.
Well, I'm talking about the beginning too. At the beginning, I said, my God, when I first saw it, I said, this guy, they're covering this guy up in a fucking goofy outfit. That's where, guys got trepidatious about going to work for Vince. He'd made so many guys tons of money, but then he starts blue blazering and red roostering, and you never knew what you were going to get. But the fact that more people would want to become a wrestler because of the blue blazer than him being himself and being a main event guy, because the blue blazer was prelim for the kids.
Yes and no. Again, if you were a younger fan in '89,
cool moves.
Yeah, I mean, the same way, even though Muta was cool and a heel and it was different, for WWF fans, you had a guy doing backflips off the rope who could do a lot of things.
At least Muta looked like a fucking Japanese assassin in some kind of fucking movie, kung fu movie, instead of, goddamn, the blue blazer. Named after a sport coat.
Well, Jim, our next question from the Cult of Cornette Facebook group on Facebook. Actually, that's exactly where it is. This was sent in by
the Cult of Cornette Facebook group is now on Facebook.
Congratulations. This question was sent in by Patrick O'Malley. What is the best advice you have for someone working on the Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee independent scene as a referee?
Quit!
Give your notice!
Give your notice! Oh, I mean, it's the same anywhere. I don't really know how to give a referee advice these days otherwise than to counter shoulders if they're down and try not to get any on you. I mean, see, that's a question that people ask. Well, what advice do you have for me? Well, just having never seen you, and when I hear Kentucky or Tennessee or Alabama independent scene, that could be anything from the outhouse to the penthouse. So I don't know who you're working with, what your parameters are, what your current conditions are, what your age is, what your goals and aspirations are, or your social security number. So I really don't know what to tell you, but I would say if you're having fun and you're enjoying yourself and it's not harming your personal life or your family life, then I say absolutely have the time of your life. But if it is doing any of those things, or you are going to be upset if you don't get a job with a major network television promotion, chances are you better quit now, because otherwise you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
In terms of in-ring performance as a referee, for all the criticism we've seen in the last year or so, especially about Aubrey Edwards and doing things to stand out, do you think that sort of, not to that degree maybe, but the referee that stands out a little more, is it more accepting on a small show in, let's say, Alabama, Mississippi, or Tennessee? Or should a referee, what's the conduct he should have as a referee? What would you prefer? If you had to go do a show and you had referees you have never used before, what do you want out of them?
Well, I want them to know who's going to go over and recognize the finish when they see it, and to disqualify anybody if they do anything in front of them that should call for disqualification, and otherwise stay out of the way. And, it's funny because Tommy Young, I've always said, greatest referee that I've ever seen. And there were other good ones. Ronnie West was great. And obviously Brian Hildebrand, Mark Curtis was great. And Earl Hebner. But Tommy stood out by not trying to stand out. And it's odd, but if I've said this before, he had all the right reactions and he had a reaction to everything, but it wasn't like referee Aubrey, look at me, or making really silly faces for long periods of time, or all the other tomfoolery that the video clips show are getting into. Tommy would wince, or Tommy would be knocked off his feet inadvertently by somebody bumping into him from behind and be honestly shocked about it. Or Tommy would see that he had counted 3 with the guy's leg on the ropes and then suddenly see it and emotions would go over his face in 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. First surprise and then regret and then determination. I've got to restart the match. But at the same time, he wasn't making you look at him. He was doing these things for anybody that was looking at him. They would look legitimate. And because when I started noticing that, then I couldn't look away from Tommy because a lot of times he was more entertaining than the fucking match that was going on. But that's the thing is you have to be in the ring reacting to what's going on around you and looking like you're trying to be the referee. And if you're accomplishing that and you're not getting in the guy's way and you're not fucking up the finish, then you're an adequate referee. And then from there, referees get good when they have more experience. But still, it's an art of a bad referee can make a good match bad. A good referee can make a bad match better. A great referee can make a really great match off the charts. All those things can happen. So it depends on the guy and how well he takes to it and how much it really looks like he's trying to do something about all this chaos going on around him. And the good ones figure out a way to not get buried by bullshit.
Jim, let's get one more question before we go back to a review of the AEW Biography show. This was sent in on the official Cult of Cornette Facebook group by Jack Rutherford. Why didn't the Barbarian get a decent push anywhere? He was a powerhouse, and yeah, he looked like a road warrior, but it just seems like he didn't get a real push until the Powers of Pain. Then Vince got them, split them up, and then antlers. Why rib the guy? No title runs, low-profile feuds, stuck in Paul Jones's freak show. Why? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you. Barb was a great guy, and Barb was an incredible physical specimen, and he looked like a monster heel, but he couldn't talk. And he has, if anybody's ever spoken to him, he has a really thick accent to begin with. Had in those days and still has to some extent. And
I love him in Body Slam.
Yeah, well, that's what,
are you Smarak? That's his voice.
That's when he got in trouble out there, because once he was away from home, he imbibed a little too much at the hotel bar, and they had to fly Saney in to fucking get him out of jail. He ate the cop's mace and headbutted the police car. But anyway, but that was the thing and unfortunately, he also, a lot of people don't think of him as being a guy who got, jacked around by the loss of the territories, but that's another thing that happened because, I can't remember when he first started, but he wasn't really used in a prominent position till the early 80s, right? And he had a few spots in a decent territory, but basically it came to, where was he right before he went to work for Crockett? Georgia?
He was, before he went to work for Crockett, remember he had been in Memphis, he had been in Georgia. He was in Mid-South was he there for your debut TV taping?
He may have been.
Conga?
See, he had so many different names. He was Conga the Barbarian, and then he was the Barbarian, then he was King Tonga, wasn't he? Or was that Haku?
Haku was King Tonga.
But even though Barbarian is from Tonga.
Right.
See, that's the problem. So, point is, he was fairly new and fairly green until the early 80s. And then he had a run of the territories that we just mentioned. And yes, he did have a nice run in 84 right after I left in Memphis. And then he was in Paul Jones's army. And that's the thing. He needed a manager because he couldn't talk. He could fulfill the athletic part and look like a wild beast. But then the problem became, everybody that got put in Paul Jones's army in Dusty's time period there, the fans knew that they were the mid-card group. And then
why slot him in there right away, though? That's, I guess, part of the question.
I don't know. Abundance of riches, had a great roster, whatever the case.
Of all the people for him to work with, Jimmy Valiant?
I know. But and obviously I just spoke well of Jimmy Valiant earlier in the show, but this is 10 years after that, and Jimmy was already in his, how old would he have been at that point? Jesus, old enough, mid-40s. And it was a different gimmick. So he wasn't going to be bumping around a lot for the Barbarian, one of the strongest, toughest, baddest guys legitimately in the fucking business. But Barb was a nice guy out of the ring, too. And that was the thing. He was a nice guy. And then when the Powers of Pain, they were put together with Warlord, was the same thing. He was a well-spoken, nice guy, but wasn't a great promo, but looked like he was chiseled out of granite. But I've mentioned before that Dusty almost a lot of times, except with the Horsemen and the Midnight Express, Dusty did the same thing with the Road Warriors that Vince tried to do with all of his top guys. Go for the giant against the giant, the monster against the monster. And if you go back and notice, the Road Warriors drew their biggest money against smaller heels with more heat rather than big guys that looked like they could match up to them physically. Because the theory behind that was, well, if the people love the Road Warriors and their baby faces, we've got to find guys that look like they can beat them and get sympathy on them and make them the baby face. But it still didn't work. They just didn't really like seeing the Road Warriors against guys that were as big as they were. When the Road Warriors were against guys that were smaller than they were, whereas the Freebirds or the Midnight or Tully and Arn, Steve Regal and Jimmy Garvin in the AWA, young, smaller guys with big mouths and heat, the people love to see the Road Warriors beat them up. And that's where the lasting memories seem to come from with the Road Warriors. So they tried to push Barb in the Powers of Pain along with Wardlow.
The love child of the Barbarian and the Warlord. Wardlow.
There you go. And no wonder he's so attached to his hair. But then they, and they did the bench press angle, but it wasn't setting the world on fire at the box office, the program between these two teams, because the people, it just didn't click. And Paul Jones was not a manager that needed to be put in that position at that point in time. And then Dusty booked him in the scaffold matches. And Warlord and Barbarian both looked and said, well, fuck, we're fucking 300 pounds apiece. We'll break both our fucking legs. And so they migrated north. And that, again, Vince took two monsters, but that tag team was limited because Warlord was still green at that point and never under the best circumstances was a guy that was taking backdrops and providing a lot of action at that size. Barbarian could move like crazy for his size, but if he's the cat-like quick one of the team, and they couldn't talk. And then there was no play. He had been one place, and I think he went back to WCW mid-90s, right? Then they were
Haku, the Faces of Fear.
Yeah, but then they were so full of talent at that point. And, so there it was. That was his window of opportunity. There was just not a lot of places to work.
If only he had been given a different manager, who knows what his career would have been. But I think you're right. Once you put him with Paul Jones, even though Paul Jones got sillier as the years went on, he was there with Paul Jones from 85 to 88?
Yeah.
How do you recover from that?
And see, the thing is, in the Carolinas, it was a little bit different because Paul Jones had been such a major name wrestling there. But when we went to new markets, and they just judged by what they were seeing on television at that time, no, it didn't work.
Well, Jim, speaking of things that have no natural transition from working or not working, A&E. Of course, another season of WWE Biography, which is, as it says at the end of the show, produced by WWE for A&E. And this week's episode was Jake the Snake Roberts.
A lot of initials there. For A&E by WWE. You know, I said that I like the A&E shows and the documentaries and the biographies and the things in general because we get to see the old footage, and that's so much fun. And boy, you see the people jumping up and down and screaming. You see the old rivalries and feuds you remember and the action and etc. It's always, except this one wasn't fun. Because you can kind of give it the heartwarming ending, which they did, but you can't make Jake's story fun, especially with everything that has been revealed about that story over the last several years. But I'll say that Jake he's worked on it for so long and he's told it so much now. He's figured out a way to tell it so dramatically. He's like an evil Wilford Brimley.
You know, not to take anything away from the story and everything else, and I think when he's just being asked questions and answering, it's one thing, but for me, I thought it was too performy at times. He knows the speech he's going to give.
Yeah, well, and that's what he's done great at it. He's gone from being a great wrestling promo to an incredible storyteller about his own life, and he has come up with the explanation for why he turned out like he did, and he's perfected it to where he can be a babyface to people even after being in various ways, whether a parent or a father or a husband or an employee or a person, one of the most despicable people ever. But now he's turned it all around to where he can actually even talk about it and say what a prick he was, and other people will argue with him about, no, Jake, we love you. No, I was the worst human being in the world. And they'll argue with him.
I remember in 95 at Fan Week, something you said that Tommy Noe's mom said. She saw Jake on religious programming, because I believe Tommy and his mom are religious.
Yes.
And she said to Tommy, he always knows what to say. And I always thought that stayed with me. I still remember that quote. He always knows what to say.
And that's why his wrestling career was as successful as it was for the period of time it was. We'll talk about that. That's why. And a lot of people will tell you, any addict, you read the stories or you hear the talk from their families, they have to be manipulators. And Jake was one of the best one, either professionally or personally. And he can always spin a situation, and he's brilliant at it. And when you go back and you look at the compilation just of the interviews they showed here, because everybody, all the fans and everybody in the business, the thing they always talked about Jake was the promos, the interviews. He can talk because he can, and he could, and he did. And Jake was, I don't know, like we've talked about Honky Tonk Man, Wayne Ferris got by psychologically as a heel. He got away with doing the absolute least he could in the ring and got the most, response out of it. And some of it was, the over-the-top wackiness. Jake was kind of like an evil Honky Tonk Man. Jake was an excellent worker. But except for the DDT, the knee lift that he used as a babyface, and a short arm clothesline, what did Jake do at a punch?
Nothing.
Jake did go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's why if you ever see any of his opponents from back then interviewed, they all talk about how much they loved working with him. It was like a night off.
Yeah, night off, punches off, kicks off. No, I'm kidding. It was a night off because he did the bare minimum physically that he had to do to get by to tell the story in the ring. And I'm not knocking him. That's why I'm saying he was a fantastic worker, because everything that he did was meant to get the fucking reaction or opinion or whatever that he wanted, whether it was he did something physically or mentally or verbally or whatever. And that's, so he was kind of unique. And when we go through and we'll talk about this, you look at the years that he actually was on top for the amount of time that he's been remembered, it's insane. But it was so memorable because he was different and he manipulated everybody. with his promos, with his matches, with his behind the scenes, etc. He was very different. And that's what this show was. It's a 2-hour program, and close to half of it was more like the background music was like a horror movie, and it was talking about the dark side of his family and family relationships and family life. It wasn't a feel good, wrestling documentary or bio and look at all this great action footage. It was this, horrible story that he is again, become known for. And more of the family comments, honestly, than we've seen from anything so far. But it was like watching the Lifetime, documentary instead of a wrestling biography. I would have never known that he graduated high school with honors.
Not surprised. Smart guy.
And at the start of the program, I realized, that's right. Jake does have kids, because they interviewed his 2 sons, and then the daughter popped up. And I question marked. He's got kids. That's right. Shit. But then by the time the show's over, he's got 8 of them. 8.
8 is enough.
And only about half of them speak to him from what he says. So anyway, and Robin, his sister, is somewhat of a voice of reason from that family. And we got a lot of genuine comments from her. And, the early photos and etc. The stuff of Grizzly in action, would that have come from there looked like something there was from Mid-South, but some of that stuff looked like it may have come from Florida.
That's what I think. I think it all came from Florida.
But that's very rare to see footage of Grizzly in action. And, that's early on in this, because it was, had to be 30 minutes before he even started refereeing, the wrestling thing, because the grandmother said, I should have killed your father when I had the chance. And the whole trying to draw the family tree with Grizzly getting Jake's mother pregnant when she was the 12-year-old daughter of his girlfriend at the time. And then Robin and Sam Houston's mother was 14, but that was a different woman. And and then the molesting by the stepmother and everything. Again.
Although Robin said she didn't believe that part, actually, which I thought was interesting. They left that in the documentary. She
believed it happened, but she thought that it wasn't that Grizzly didn't know about it. It was that Grizzly was the one who was putting her up to doing it.
No, I thought Robin was saying that she didn't think her mother could actually abuse Jake.
No. She said she did that because Daddy wanted her to do it.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So the point is, yes, it is a story, but boy, for the people thinking they're sitting down for the first time I'll just watch the life story of this great wrestler that I liked when I was a kid. Oh boy, howdy. So, the rookie pictures, and there was no really reflection on how long he trained, who trained him, or who he trained with. Grizzly shamed him over his first match. I saw him in 1977, and he was the shits, just so you know. But they had clips from Calgary and Crockett where he was being used by the time he went to Mid-Atlantic. So that they were juxtaposing some of the Mid-Atlantic footage with when he was still the shits and paying his dues, but by that point he was a pushed babyface. But nevertheless, boy, did you see him against JYD in Calgary, and what was that, would that have been 78? Both of them were in shape.
Yeah, but he didn't know how to do a sleeper.
Well, no, but they looked great.
Isn't that where JYD taught him about steroids and Jake taught JYD about speed? Yeah.
He told the DDT story again that the grappler tripped him. I don't believe that. I never have believed that story.
Black Gordman was doing it, right?
Well, yeah, but besides that, it's not that big of a stretch. But nevertheless, it was so protected. And that's what got it, not only because Jake was the best one to ever do it. Most of the guys landed flat on their face instead of flipping over like became the fashion. And it looked like a impact of a dog chasing a parked car, you know. And also, do you know kids have not known that DDT was the name of a pesticide?
It's been gone a long time.
But, well, so has goddamn Babe Ruth, and I've heard of him.
Well, more people talk about him every year than DDT.
Out of DDT was fucking over, boy. It was controversial. That was bad shit. But a lot of people now these days don't know it was a pesticide, but that's what the DDT was named after. And then Vince calls Jake and pitches him the gimmick. And the gimmick was, the boys started calling Jake the Snake before that was his fucking nickname. But Vince wanted to go all the way with it, with the snake boots and the whole 9 yards. And again, that run and that place was perfect for Jake at the time. Yes, he excelled in Mid-South wrestling, but not because of the athleticism, because of the promo and the psychology. In the WWF at that point in time, where Vince is looking at making everybody a television personality and exploiting everybody's speaking ability and the different personality-based gimmicks instead of employment-based gimmicks, that Jake was perfect for that environment. And I think that's why he, again, his promos, his attitude, and his inflection, and just the look in the eyes and the meaning it, that's what got him over there. And that was the perfect place to talk yourself over in the 80s in the WWF. And he says he didn't want a DDT Steamboat on the floor. Well, he didn't not want to bad enough to loosen up on him, did he?
That holds up. That's still one of the most brutal things you can see, you can hear. Steamboat says it sounded like a bomb or a grenade going off in my head. That's what it sounds like. You could hear the thud. Yeah,
well, and part of that, honestly, was Jake hitting the ground too. But see, the thing is, a lot of guys, the idea was that obviously he would give Ricky Steamboat his finish on the concrete floor, and that would be more heinous, like when Gordy pile drove DiBiase on the concrete floor in the TBS studio instead of in the ring. We talked about that few fucking however long ago, few weeks or whatever. But Jake he didn't want to do it because he said he would kill him. But once they determined that they were going to do it, the priority was that the DDT looked good and not that Steamboat did not get fucking killed. So that's what tickled me about it, because, you know, it was like Jake said, okay, I'll kill him. Well, we got to do it. Okay. And Steamboat says, I can protect myself. Well, then it's incumbent upon you to fucking kind of take care of the guy because it's on the floor instead of the ring. But Jake just said, okay, and gave him the goddamn DDT. So he wasn't worried about Steamboat enough to make his hold look bad, is what I'm trying to. It's because the hold was over.
Hey, what do you think of the Jake Roberts DDT where the guy goes flat down versus the Michael Hayes DDT? Other people did it too, where it's more of a rolling DDT.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's just a low altitude fucking snap suplex at that point. It didn't have the appeal. And if you noticed, not only would Jake hook the fucking face lock, and he was so tall and had the long legs and the long arms, right as he was going to drop the guy, he'd raise his right arm and bring it down and slap the guy on the back like he was putting every bit of momentum behind the guy's sudden descent as he could. And it was quick and it snapped off like that. That's what the key was. When, again, guys started taking fancy bumps where they stood up on their head like a fence post and then bounced back up to their feet and twirled around and fucking skipped, or the rolling bumps or the off the ropes or what, it just fucked the whole thing up.
It is interesting, too. He invents it in his eyes, but he popularizes it. He names it. And that name sticks with the move no matter who does it. Even when Jake was at his peak as being a star, Michael Hayes, Arn Anderson, whoever did it, was called the DDT. Today, When people do it as a transition move and kick out of it, it's still called the DDT. It's one of the last moves that kept its name no matter who was doing it.
That's because it was over. It was, at that time, it was one of the most over moves in the business. And it was protected because Jake was smart enough to know that just for the sake of having a good match, or God forbid, getting a baby face over, because Jake didn't care about getting anybody over when it came to prostituting his move. If you got hit with it, you got beat with it. Had the highest winning percentage of anything in wrestling probably at the time. So that's why it was over. It's not hard to figure out.
That's why Hogan wouldn't work with him, because the fans were going to chant for DDT.
Yeah. And guess what? If Jake gave him the DDT, it was going to be because he was going to pin him. Maybe if they'd have said, Jake, you'll be the main event with Hogan at WrestleMania and you'll make 300, 400 grand or whatever, he's all right. But not until then. But anyway, and at that point, speaking of which, with Undertaker, Undertaker takes the DDT and sits up. And then tombstones Jake, and then Jake is beaten at WrestleMania, and Jake is done in the WWF, 1992.
Only time he ever comes out without the snake.
And the only time, did anybody ever survive the DDT? Ever before that?
I can't think of anyone.
I don't think, and they definitely didn't sit up, and that's what...
I can't think of anyone ever kicking out of Jake's DDT.
Yeah,
actually.
So that's why the Undertaker, that helped him a little bit more, and at the same time, that the reason why it was done was because he was done. And they glossed over the reason, the specific reasons with specificity, but Jake said, I went off the deep end, and I was out of control for the next 20 years. And that's... pretty much, I can't even remember the specific. Did he flunk a test? Did he just get heat? Why did they part ways with Jake in 92? It was his behavior, but I can't remember what the exact situation.
He was partying, because I think that led into Road Warrior Hawk's issues, actually, that came to a head later that year in SummerSlam. But Jake has told the story before. I know he says it about when he came back in 96, but he has said before that he thought he was going to be on the booking team, or whatever you want to call it, in 92, and that Vince decided not to do that, and because of that, Jake decided to party for the next several years.
All the drugs in Colombia.
Yeah. And he still, but that's the thing though, they didn't point out that, Jake Roberts left WWF and then he came back in 96. He was still making money. He worked for WCW, but he was doing all those AAA shows where he was the biggest heel in Mexico.
Yeah.
And he worked for Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
By the way, making a ton of money in cash in Mexico for a drug addict, is that a bad lifestyle? But let's go back a minute. He is gone from WWF in 92 after WrestleMania, but that's when he went to WCW. Because who was there? Bill Watts.
Grizzly, if you're going to say it.
Well, but Grizzly, he wasn't the person hiring people. At the time, Bill Watts had success with Jake in Mid-South. And I'm pretty sure, thought, well, I did it before. I'm the team captain, the football captain, or the fucking coach. I can control my team. I can control Jake. You can see where they would have made that move. And also, that move didn't even last a fucking year, did it? Did he make a year?
It didn't last 4 months.
That's right. And then that's when he started going to Mexico, where he was the top heel for AAA. And that's where I foolishly said, well, he just lives 200 miles down the road in Atlanta. And 2 years ago, he was in the main event at WrestleMania. Can Jake the Snake Roberts draw me any money if we let him talk on TV and work in our buildings? And the answer to that was, we'll never fucking find out, because it didn't last that long. He made 3 shows, but here's the thing. I can tell you from firsthand experience, when I called Jake on the phone, when I drove down to his house in Atlanta to see him and to shoot promos and talk to him and his lovely wife, Cheryl, at the time, And he was telling me, oh, I've straightened up. I'm trying to make some amends. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. You'll find me fair and honest and all this stuff. This was like 6 months after his daughter had just said that when she moved to Atlanta to spend time with him, that she drove the whole way from Texas to Georgia because he was smoking crack the whole way in the car with his daughter. And that was 6 months before he's telling me, oh, I've straightened up and I got to blah, blah, blah.
I didn't realize that was the same daughter from the Blaustein film until the very end, and they showed the old clips. I didn't put two and two together. It was the same daughter.
So, but at that point, besides the WWF run 96-97, which we'll talk about in a second, think about this. Jake Roberts, Jake the Snake, still to this day one of the most remembered stars. And you would think, oh, yeah, he's one of those guys who was around forever. His WWE run lasted 6 years. He had been a pro at that point for about 17 years, but honestly, let's go with starting with Crockett in 81. His run as a pushed performer lasted 1981 to 1993. Out of WCW, then, like I said, with AAA and Smoky Mountain, and apparently a lot of 95 somewhere on Uranus, and then one more year in the WWF, he was done. It has been almost 30 years, 27 years since, 26 years now since Vince, right? Or since Jake. Since that last run with Vince, since he was on a national television promotion, and he, by his own admission, spent the next 20 years as a drunk asshole on the indies. So to be remembered for that period of time that much, he accomplished something, despite his best efforts not to. And I felt sorry a lot of times for his daughter and his sons and the normal people that got caught up in all of this. But also, if you go back and look, and I'm just making an observation, the 1996 return, where he was giving glory to God and supposedly, according to Peter Rosenberg, who should know he was there, right, when he was 12 years old or whatever. He really was born again. He had a new personality. He was trying to make amends. Bullshit. At that time, he was 40 and looked 60. The run in the ring was a disaster because he was fat and slow, and the guys had passed him in the ring at that time. And the physical part was never the greatest part of his game anyway. But again, at that point, that was what he sold Vince, was the story that, oh, I have found God and I'm trying to, do good or whatever. And he wanted to be on the creative team. And we've talked about this before, which lasted a period of weeks. And when the excuses started, we believed them, because who would have thought that this guy would fuck up again this quick, right? But how could every member of his family be sick every week? Sick at the start of the week where he couldn't fly to Connecticut, and sick at the end of the week where he had to go home early. But with the interaction with Steve Austin, which they made the point of, was his inadvertent and last great contribution to what was going on at that time in the WWF. But we talk on the booking committee, Jake blamed, the quote was, being around other wrestlers, even while being a Christian, was just too much for his demons. That's why he was riding with guys that I'm pretty sure at least one of them had probably never even laid his eyes on crack, much less used it. And while he was on the creative team, Jake was asking these middle card guys that he was bumming a ride with because he didn't have a driver's license to go to the fucking crack house on the way to Madison Square Garden. Before the show even.
Not even after the show, before the show.
Not even after the night. Couldn't even wait for the crack till after the show. Had to have the And then the footage, the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view I've seen before, but some of the other stuff of him just being drunk and slobbering on independent shows, I hadn't seen all of that. And that was, and I mean, he admits it, you know, he was a bad parent and a rotten fucking person. But like I said at the top, the rotten thing is you can never tell with Jake, is it real or is it Memorex? Is it genuine or prepared for a purpose?
You know, the daughter at the end said something interesting about how, you know, you said there's 8 kids. 4 will talk to Jake and 4 won't. 4 think he's changed or he's a different person. 4, for whatever reason, don't. And I think that's kind of a divide in wrestling, too. You know, DDP did a lot to rejuvenate the image of Jake Roberts, let alone whatever he did on a personal level in terms of health and everything else. But there are people who still say Jake's still the same guy. He's still a jerk. He's still a bad person. There's someone I know in wrestling who I have a lot of respect for, who typically looks on the brighter side of things. And he wrote to me one time after hearing something we said about Jake on the show, he's not a good person. So I think that was interesting because they left that in. And they left different things in that at times, you know, it wasn't just a rosy picture of Jake. I mean, at the end when he's fishing on the boat with his kids, it kind of does present that. But the point is, for everyone that thinks Jake is a different person, there's probably equally an amount of people that think it's not the abuse, it's not Grizzly, it's not the drugs, it's not anything. It's his mentality. Whatever it is, even when things are going well, if Jake could screw someone over, he will. And personally, I know multiple people, including someone on the line right now, that Jake has screwed over in his lifetime. And at a certain point, like I said, you can't just blame drugs and everything. It's the mentality of the person. It's the person choosing to do something and knowing they could talk their way out of it. So I'm happy he's in a better place now, but it doesn't really change the way I see Jake as a person. Phenomenal professional wrestler, especially mentally.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. To me, it pretends like it's now all over. And he's, I don't know, what do you think? I'm babbling.
Yeah, well, I think back to what Aunt Lola used to say. Everything you do gets blamed right on you. That was a very profound statement.
Yeah, we'll see if anyone writes a song about that. Let me ask you.
Wrote a song about it. Like to hear it. Here it goes.
One last question, just because whenever we talk about this stuff, this comes up. And we just reviewed the Dark Side Grizzly Smith episode. Was that last year? I forget. I think it was last year.
Yeah.
People say, how did anyone not know? How did the people in Mid-South not know? Remember, Baby Doll was on Dark Side and said, I sat in the car looking for it, and I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Jerry Gray was on 605 once, talking about being in the car with Grizzly, who, again, number 2 guy in the promotion. Jerry was working undercard. The guy says, you want to ride with me? You say, yes. There's a girl there. Didn't see anything. Didn't see anything. In fact, it was almost like he was the beloved uncle or something. So you know,
they went into more detail on, it was either the Dark Side episode or another one of these documentaries that has plumbed the depths of Grizzly.
But my question,
it's the same thing with Jake. They are manipulators, and they could say things to make you believe that any suspicion you had was something was wrong with you.
But to the people today that say there's no way anyone who was working for Mid-South Wrestling, there's no way that any of those wrestlers or anyone there didn't know this guy was a child molester. You were there. I mean, what do you say?
Again, no, nobody. I mean, it was joked about because he was always Grizzly. We're talking too many pronouns, pal. Grizzly would always be around the groups of young girl fans. But it was only when the car pulled up, he knew all of their names, right? And he got in, he waved and blah, blah, blah. But this also was the 80s when I was there. Grizzly had been, in his 50s? And whatever he had done previously, he had apparently slowed down on it. And the guys made jokes because he was always around, but nothing happened. Nobody said something was happening. And when they had done the documentaries that we talked about, they went back and talked about how the Grizzly didn't share his personal life, that Gainesville, Texas is way out from where other goddamn people in the wrestling business lived. He didn't bring the wife on the road so they could see that the wife was fucking 16 years old or whatever. And there's no cell phone, social media, no fucking Facebook. A lot of people lived double lives back then. And, people were shocked to find out what had been going on. So, and also, Jesus H. Christ, when you're a wrestler from anywhere of any experience level and you come in and one of the guys that's, working for the promotion that's in the office is telling you to do shit. Yeah, show up here at 7:00 and do that. You don't do a goddamn background check on them. But again, a lot of people, this story was not even known in wrestling back in those days. Now, every goddamn, everybody in the world knows it, and they think that everybody always has.
I don't think anyone knew the story of Jake's conception until Beyond the Mat, or is it Beyond? Yeah, Beyond the Mat.
Beyond the Mat was the first. Yeah, that was what, 20 years ago. So that was the first time that even came up. And then nobody had gone to interview the family members. And Robin, at one point in time, part of her healing and going through all of that was being able to actually talk about it and discuss it and, get over it and everything. So well, it wasn't something they were all going, oh, by the way, did you hear what Grizz did last week? Fuck. I think people sometimes they confuse history with what people knew at the time. If everybody knew history at the time it was happening, then nobody'd ever lose a fucking war.
Do you think they should have mentioned that he's working for AEW?
Well, that's the last thing I was going to fucking laugh at, because they said everything else in this documentary, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're talking about his father being a pedophiliac that fucking his own mother wanted to kill, but they won't mention AEW. And Jake, actually, I'm so grateful to the WWE for putting this piece out there so folks can know how I am now, since I'm living a life of complete obscurity because I work for a promotion that has national television. So yeah, pedophilia, rape, incest, drug addiction, alcohol, making a mess of your life and your kids' lives, that's fine, but don't mention AEW.
Well, that was the A&E, not AEW, but the A&E biography of Jake the Snake Roberts, of course, produced by WWE for A&E. And some may say that's false advertising. I think I'm watching A&E biography, and it's produced by WWE. That doesn't seem right. That's not the way they did biography back in the day. I think I may want to sue.
Are you talking about a bait and switch type of situation?
A bait and switch type of situation.
I thought you might be talking about, well, if anybody ever wanted to do a documentary on me like this, where they made Jake Roberts' story even more uplifting than Randy Savage's because they just wanted to fuck with him last season. Well, either way, if you need to sue somebody, then I know who that you should call in order to sue.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Those are the rest.
And I'll tell you what, if you have heard about some horrible goings-on down in the state of Louisiana, down in Cajun country, Louisiana, as we used to call it when the people there wanted to kill us, well, it's not bad weather. It's not that big, giant, high pressure or low pressure. It's not a hurricane blowing through. No, it is Hurricane Stephen is who it is. It's Stephen P. New and the folks at newlawoffice.com. Phone number 888-692-8084. They have been shaking things up down in the state of Louisiana, where that energy company, Entergy, boy, how original, has basically screwed almost 500,000 people in the state of Louisiana. 350,000 residential customers, 17,000 business customers. During that last bout with the Hurricane Ida, the whole grid collapsed, all the towers, everything was down. These people were without power from 1 to 3 weeks. There were people, their businesses were ruined, their lives were inconvenienced, their lives were put at risk, all because of the greediness and the avariciousness of these Entergy people who not only did not reinforce their towers the way they were supposed to withstand the hurricane winds, the way they told the government they were going to, but instead they gave all the money to their big wigs. And the guy that's just apparently left that used to be running this company, he is now slinking out in shame. Well, they gave him $43 million worth of this stock on the way out. And you just know Stephen P. New is going to be doing something about that, not to mention the mass litigation panel. That just sounds scary. That's a mass litigation panel. That sounds like somebody that decides whether you will live or get set fire to. And that right now is actively underway in West Virginia against 75 different defendants on behalf of the opioid-addicted babies. A bunch of people had their hands in this. Stephen P. New's going after all of them. And they're part of a multi-district litigation against the consulting company McKinsey in San Francisco. You'll recall that I mentioned them last week. They're the ones that put out that sexual report in the 70s, screwed everybody's heads up. And they're also New Law Office filing cases in New York, Ohio, Tennessee, and it's either Los Angeles or Louisiana on behalf of the little addicted babies in the very near future. So if you would like to have a man like this representing you, a man who fights for babies and for electrical power and clean milk and all the other good things that people fight for, then you want to call Stephen P. New at newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084, because much as he represents me, he can represent thee. And much as he represents you, he can represent you too. Stephen P. New.
That's right, Stephen P. New. But Jim, before we get back to another review, because you watched the WWE Rivals Undertaker versus Mankind, which you actually participated in real time.
Yes.
Once upon a time. A few questions that have been sent in. Let's get to these before the next review. Several listeners, as we are recording, have been sending in several articles from different sites. Chris Jericho has given an interview where he has stated he has zero interest in ever going back to WWE. Have you been following this?
I have not. Is he in the Hall of Fame over there yet?
He is not.
He'll be back.
Apparently, the Daily Star did an article on Chris Jericho, and there's some quotes. I'll read these to you. When asked if AEW would be where he ends his career, here's what he said. I don't see why it wouldn't be. I don't hold a torch for WWE. To me, that's not the place to be. AEW is the place to be. It really is. I've been in WWE. I know how it works. They work that way. I don't care if Vince is there.
I know how it works and they work that way. That's a profound statement.
I don't care if Vince is there, Hunter is there, or whoever is there. They have a way of doing things, and I was there for 20 years and was pretty good at it. I like the way we do things at AEW better. Tony lets me run wild with all my ideas and do anything I want. No, I made up that second part. I like the way we do things at AEW better. So I don't know why I wouldn't want to finish my career at AEW. I never thought that I wouldn't finish my career with WWE, but things happened. And I was just like, I want to go to Japan and do this match. And it opened up a whole new world for me. It was like, oh my gosh, this is the fun side of wrestling again. Business is business, and there's always ups and downs, but I have zero interest in ever going back to WWE. That's not out of bitterness or anger. It's out of a $10 million multi-year contract. That's not out of bitterness or anger. I love Vince and I love Hunter and all the people there. But I just really dig AEW. And I have a stake in the game. I came here right out of the gate.
How long is this? This question.
It's almost over. I came here right out of the gate. I was the guy. Besides Jim Ross, there was nobody that had really been on television on a national basis other than me. I take great pride in that. I started here. Why would I want to walk away? There's so much more that we can do. The sense of accomplishment is massive.
Okay. Well, first of all, did anybody think he was going to say anything else? Secondly, would anybody in the WWE have expected him to say anything else? If you'll notice, love is in the air. He doesn't hate Vince. Loved the WWE, was good at it, great. But now I'm here. Yes, because he's not stupid enough to say, no, I would entertain the thought of going back there someday when he's under a 10-year contract or whatever. Didn't we do the math and say he'll be under contract to Tony Khan when he's 62?
I believe so.
And I would think that Jericho, although I haven't seen the documents or consulted with his personal attorney, Jericho's not stupid enough to do honestly a fucking thing like Brett did and trust somebody on a contract of that much money for that period of time, unless it's got to be more than, because AEW might or might not be in business. The WWE might or might not be in business in 10 years now. So certainly he's not going to say, oh, you'll give me $10 million over 10 years or whatever the fuck it is. What if your company's not around? What happens then? Oh, well, I wouldn't be able to pay you. Well, then fuck you. So that's got to be guaranteed with Khan money.
By the dad. It's guaranteed by Shad Khan.
So he's not going to go back and wrestle for the WWE. That much is true. Because if they continue to pay him not to for the next 10 years, that much money, he will not do that. And it's a whole lot easier wrestling once a week or whenever you feel like it for a guy who's so happy to have you that he'll let you get away with anything that you fucking want, or go to another company where, as he says, he knows how they do things and they would want him to wrestle more if they wanted him to wrestle at all. Now, yes, he can still go in the ring so they could bring him back instead of, Brock and Cena and a few others quite so often. But the window that they would want Chris Jericho to wrestle in the WWE, or the amount of times, would be limited at this point, much less in 4 or 5 years. However, once that whatever happens with AEW, and provided that the Saudis don't buy the WWE and everybody just boycotts them and they say, fuck it, we'll fold it, then at whatever point that Jericho is contractually free, then he will go back to the WWE because they'll induct him into the Hall of Fame. And do you think Chris Jericho will turn down being inducted into a Hall of Fame?
No, he'll say, this has always been my home. I always wanted to do this. I
was
thankful.
Gone for a while, but now the prodigal son returns.
The idea that at this point in 2023, seeing the state of AEW is still the place to be. Whether it ever was or wasn't is up for debate, but certainly early on when the excitement was there, when wrestlers were being signed to ridiculous contracts, people really wanted to go to AEW. You talk to wrestlers now, you hear about trying to get back to WWE or trying to get to WWE. Do you think AEW is still the place to be?
Well, for Jericho, it is, for the reasons I just talked about. He's got the run of the place. The boss will acquiesce to his wishes. He's getting paid a lot of money for not a lot of dates and can do whatever the fuck he wants to. Now, that's not going to happen for everybody. So it's the place to be if Tony Khan is a fan of yours and will give you a large amount of money for a small amount of work. It's not the place to be if you're And, a lot of times they'll tell guys, younger guys in the business, well, just get on TV, get exposure, get seen. Right now, I don't know if being signed and committing yourself to be in the AEW system means that you'll get on TV. You might be on YouTube. You might be on fucking Rampage, which is almost like not being on television. And you might be seen once every 6 fucking months or whatever. At least if you're serious about being a wrestler and you believe that you have the talent to get over and have not only the talent, but the look and the charisma and etc., then unfortunately for the folks at AEW, the WWE is now the place again that you would want to go to try to maximize that. Sorry.
Well, Jim, on the topic of AEW stars and interesting quotes they're making, Kenny Omega has recently done an interview with Renee Moxley Good, and we have some
now
quotes
say
here.
it right. Say her name right. It's Renee Moxley Good.
Renee Moxley Good. And here's the quote. They got me talking like an idiot, too. Here's some quotes from this Kenny Omega interview talking about the all-out fight. He, I guess, was referencing that when he left after his injury in November 2021, AEW was in a good place. Here's him talking about his return. I didn't get it. I was like, what is with this strange atmosphere? What is with this strange aura? Why does something feel so ominous right now? I didn't know, and I couldn't figure it out. Next you knew, there was more stuff happening. So I ate another pill. No, excuse me.
Hey.
Omega, this is, he's talking about the fight. It's a shame the general public and a lot of people aren't ever going to know how it went down, or how it could have been prevented, or how it could have ended differently.
I think we've gone over all of those options and alternatives.
And we could just tell Tony that he could let everyone talk about it. That's the only reason why no one's talking about it, is because they're afraid that they can't. But anyway, back to this. I don't think anyone is happy that it happened, or proud that it happened. Well, who knows about that?
I don't know. Some of his buckaroo bonsai friends seem to enjoy mocking Punk on TV about it, so they don't seem to have learned anything.
I think across the board, everyone thinks it was a terrible situation that was unnecessary. Any thoughts on that?
Well, the same thing. Then why did they make fun of it and build spots around it in one of their phony wrestling matches?
Another quote that a bunch of people started sending us in. This is from an SE Scoops article by, I'm not going to try. Here's some quotes from Kenny Omega. Give me your thoughts on this. He's talking about his matches and his influences. I was getting matches around 18 minutes to 25-ish. Then for the big ones, that's anywhere from 30 to 50 to an hour. But the main ones are like 20-ish. So
hold on, just right there. So he equates the length of his matches with the quality of them. That's kind of like the fucking frozen food people when they sell you food, and that's the most attractive selling point is, look, you get 1.5 pounds of this. We're not saying it's good, but it's going to be a lot of it. Go ahead.
So I thought, how can I study for this? How can I improve myself? Can I take nods from anything around me? I began to study weekly cartoons.
Oh, good God.
Specifically superhero cartoons. Because an episode lasts around 21 minutes long.
Oh, good God.
There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. The hero gets put into peril.
There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to everything, not just cartoons.
The hero gets put into peril at some point. Every week, there's probably a new villain featured. For example, Batman cannot fight the Joker every week. It's not always going to be that serious. There's not always going to be that, oh my goodness, the world may end moment. Sometimes he has to fight the Riddler. Sometimes he has to fight Mr. Freeze or Clayface.
Oh, wait a minute. What did Mr. Freeze and Clayface do to get put on the job guy list of heels? They could be threatening under the right circumstances.
How do you make all those instances? How do you make all those altercations interesting? How do you make them feel like they mean something? How do you make them feel different from one another?
How do you make this motherfucker shut his pie hole?
Sometimes you can elicit other emotions. Even though you're supposed
Nausea? Is nausea an emotion?
Even though you are supposed to be taken as this incredible superhero, someone that's larger than life, someone who's supposed to be one of the best at doing what you do. So I have found that specifically Batman cartoons, Justice League, yeah, they really helped a lot.
To put his matches together.
People want to know what your thoughts are on Kenny Omega using cartoons, specifically, according to several emails here, Batman cartoons to influence the way he puts together his matches.
I don't know. His shit looks more like Bugs Bunny Roadrunner to me than Batman. I wouldn't have thought he would go for something that serious. Again, this is a fucking video game nerd that got into wrestling because it's the only thing that he could do in the real, legitimate, existing world that makes him feel like he's a character in a fucking video game. And now he wants to fucking destroy DC Comics for everybody, too, by having us think about his Harpo-looking face every time we think about Batman. God damn it. And that's, again, his markishness and general overall nerdishness is why that instead of, I guarantee you this AEW video game is going to be the most realistic ever in terms of covering its subject, because half the wrestlers of the ilk of Kenny Olivier there that are in AEW, you wouldn't have to make a video game based on their moves because they already exist, because their whole fucking lives revolve around trying to act like they're in a video game, which is why all their shit doesn't apply in wrestling and it looks like shit, because it's easier to do in the video game than it is in real life. So I don't know what you want me to say here. Yes, he's a fucking nerd. Yes, he's a fucking dipshit of various kinds that has a detached, confused expression on his face most of the time because he doesn't understand what's going on around him. And he thinks he's the star of a fucking video game, which now, thanks to a son of a billionaire giving him an unlimited budget, he has made himself the star of a fucking video game. I mean, yes, there are things in life, in every genre of entertainment and sport, that you can take and adapt to wrestling. And I was always a fan of stand-up comics and comedians and people who used words and language on television when I was a kid and a young adult. So, yes, the snappy repartee comes in handy. But still, you have to know what to take from something else and apply to your chosen profession, rather than trying to make your chosen profession bend a knee to you and just say, okay, well, it's okay if we do all this shit now because that's the way you do it. Well, fuck you. Do it the right way like everybody else does. You're going to steal shit, make it apply to the fucking thing you're doing instead of what you're stealing from.
Well, Jim, a few CM Punk questions before we get moving on here. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Michael Pallas. I know there's no chance of this hell freezing over moment ever happening, but let's say we have our own Jerry Lawler to WWF moment, and Tony Khan gives up the AEW booking. Also, let's say CM Punk is the one who takes the book. 1, do you think he could do a good job as booker? And 2, what do you think his first order of business is?
Jesus. Whether he could do a good job as booker or wanted to do a good job as booker may be two different things, because the job of booker is stressful and thankless and highly, subject to burnout. And just because somebody wants to be a wrestler and do their own shit doesn't mean they want to come up with everybody's shit. But since we're what-ifing anyway, if he wanted to do it, he would be instantly better than Tony because he has some knowledge of wrestling at a high level and respect for how difficult it is to do it right and it seems like at least a good inclination to want to make the shit good and or real and or believable and not juvenile and childish. So right off the bat, yes, he would do a better job than Tony Khan. Would he be Bill Watts or fucking Leo Garibaldi or either Eddie Graham or whatever? Who knows? It would be better than what they got. But then the point is, would CM Punk be more valuable as a main event wrestler or as the booker? And the answer, I think, at this point is still he'd be more valuable in the ring as a main event wrestler. So I wouldn't, bring him in and give him the book. I'd bring him in and say, look, who do you think ought to be booking this? Give me some input. I'm going to ask you and 3 or 4 other people that are not my EVPs, because obviously they've lied to me since the start. And I would give, if I was Tony Khan, I'd give Punk and everybody else on the roster a break, a lucky break, and I would stop booking, and I would give it to somebody experienced, and I would use my resources, the money and the contacts, as the promoter to get more people to see this shit, because I wouldn't be wasting my time writing down mark shit from my basement when I was 14 years old, because it's pretty obvious this fan base has wanted to support this thing since the beginning, and it's basically give or take the same number of them that are still wanting to support this thing. They got a little pop when Punk came in, and they lost a little when he left. And I don't really know. I'm not trying to diminish the contributions of the guys that have really worked hard, like MJF or like fucking Danielson or like fucking Punk. Moxley's working real hard in his own way. He just goddamn can't get out of it. His own way, I mean. I don't want to diminish their work, but everything that they did and that they have done would have been approximately the same kind of rating, the same kind of buy rate, the same whatever, the same metric of success if anybody else had been booking instead of Tony. Because how could it have made less sense? How could it have been any worse if you used the same guys? The fans are coming to see the wrestlers, and they're coming to see these matches. The matches might have had better builds with better booking, but I can't see anything that Tony has done that either brought a bunch of people there that wouldn't have been there with anybody else booking, or truthfully, because the people, his core audience, wants so badly to see him succeed, the shit that he's done that would have run off vast amounts of fans in other eras has not done that either. They'll stick with him even if it's rotten because they want the thing to succeed, but he's not made any new fans because nothing makes any sense. Does that make sense?
I think it does, and it's important to note that CM Punk, I think we can reliably say, was one of the wrestlers that had a lot of input in every single thing he did in AEW. And
oh, yeah, that's why it always was good.
And that's why it was always good. It was always serious. The promos stuck out. The angles stuck out. Didn't always go anywhere. Like him and Kingston was kind of just a couple weeks, but you would have to think, again, we don't know how he could do on his own as a booker, but just based on that part alone, the fact that his vision, minus whatever Tony did to those segments, his vision has been pretty good on this show.
Yeah, but then also you get into the situation where if you've got a guy that always produces great interviews and great matches and his shit looks good and gets over and makes sense, whatever, that's him. If you try to say, well, then this guy should be the booker and he should write all this stuff, he's still got to have the rest of the fucking cast. And even William Shakespeare could write shit for an 8th grade drama class and the acting would still be meh, because it's a bunch of 8th graders. So the problem becomes a booker in any time period, but especially in today's environment, needs to be the one that assembles the team to run the plays and carry the ball or whatever sports analogy you want to use as he sees fit. And if a guy's just suddenly handed the book when somebody else picked the talent, then he's got to immediately say, okay, who on this roster can do the shit that I'm going to ask them to do and do it properly? And if it's less than half, then he's hamstrung from the get-go. You can't just suddenly tell Jungle Boy, go out and be a fucking interesting personality and cut a hell of a promo about this fucking thing. Well, you can say that all day long, but it ain't going to fucking happen. So that's why the booker was not only always the one who called the shots, but the booker was the one who, in the most part, in the majority, assembled the talent roster. And that's why in modern era, when all this talent was under contract and you would get a new booker, but you wouldn't get a new talent roster, a lot of times, even though those guys had had success before in different places, they don't have success again. Because now you got a football coach with a team full of fucking bench warmers for what he wants to do. So there's always that trouble too.
Jim, on the topic of CM Punk, one last question about him here. This was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Cam Domaski in Westmoreland County,
Oh, you are
Pennsylvania.
just making all of these. It's really all from Charlie, isn't it?
Cam Domaski, Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania.
All right, Gene Kaniski, what do you got to ask?
The verified Instagram account of CM Punk shared a photo from an account named No Context Corny. In this post, Jim is in a comic with the Hulk and the Thing behind him, with Jim saying, "It's clobbering time, motherfuckers." CM Punk tagged Dax Harwood and Cash Wheeler above the Hulk and the Thing. What are Jim's thoughts on this? And has he seen this fan-made comic?
Well,
a lot of people have sent.
I know, and yes, and I saw it on Twitter. I've seen that artwork from a year or two ago, and actually saved it when somebody sent it to me before. And yes, as you said, apparently Punk retweeted this or re-Instagrammed this or whatever the descriptive verb over there is. Of me, and it's me in front saying it's clobbering time with Hulk and Thing, because I think we had even done one of these questions a few years ago where who were my favorite Marvel characters, and I like the guys that could be wrestlers, the Hulk and the Thing and shit like that. And yes, Punk's trying to stir people up, and that's fine. It's a nice piece of artwork. I appreciate the sentiment. I don't know that I will be leading them into its clobbering time anytime in the near future, but it got people talking about it.
What do you think's going to happen? You think we're going to see Punk and FTR and AEW in a few months?
Well, now the thing that came up with, and we've talked about it briefly on The Experience, and more people have commented on it since then, Tony Khan, or the AEW account, thanked everybody in the company that won a Wrestling Observer Award, the prestigious Observy Award, except for FTR, who were, placed in Tag Team of the Year and Match of the Year and all this stuff. That's either one of two things. It's either a slap in the face because whatever nerd runs their social media is a nerd friend of the nerd EVPs, or it's a reason for Dax and Cash to show back up on television and go, hey, what the fuck? One of those two things would account for that. I can't think. Otherwise, stupidity might be the number 3 accounter, and otherwise I can't come up with a reason. So we'll know at some point whether they're just stupid or assholes and ignored FTR on purpose like they have the whole time they've worked there, or if it's the start of something that would see FTR and or CM Punk come back in the company. And they've got a brilliant chance to draw some money based on the legitimate ill will and bad feelings and the real fight that did happen. But then I think this is one of those things where it's one of those matches people want to see in their head more than they actually do when it happens, because you would think, okay, they could make a ton of money off this 6-man tags with Kenny and the Buckaroos, where the people believe they really want to fight and hurt and kill each other and they hate each other.
Hey, not even just 6-man tags. In between those matches, Punk versus Nick Jackson, Punk versus Matt Jackson, any of those matches are intriguing.
Well, they are when you think about it, until you realize what they'd look like. And then you would realize that neither Kenny nor the Buckaroos have ever placed any importance whatsoever on or are able to pull off making their shit look legitimate. They do all the flippy flying stuff, but the Jacksons couldn't whip cream with an outboard motor, couldn't whip a cat in a paper bag without getting fur in their mouth. And this would need to look real, and it would need to look like a fight, and there would need to be some blood and some fucking violence and mayhem. And then you'd have that visual of the two little Buckaroos trying to fight a couple of grown men, and Kenny would be trying to hop and skip and prance, and somebody else would be taking him down, trying to pull his eyeball out. They can't work like that. They cannot do it. And nobody would believe in, especially the Bucks. I know Kenny is supposedly trained in MMA. I think his just soft, weak psyche would not be able to make him present an imposing physical presence. But nobody's going to believe that the Buckaroos can be in any kind of fight with any kind of grown men. And Punk may have not won in the UFC, but goddamn, he went through the camps and he did it. So that includes the Buckaroos out, as they used to say. So do you think they could carry it off in the ring, where with the first time the people saw it, anticipating they were going to see a knockdown, drag-out fight, would they be disappointed when the Buckaroos especially couldn't look legitimate? And one more thing, and then you can answer it. Besides that, would the Bucks be so scared that they were going to potentially accidentally potato Punk that their shit would look rotten anyway, because they would know that if he thought they were taking liberties, that he would take them down and fucking stretch them right there?
Potato him right away, get it out of the way so everything else feels better after that point.
But then if he just beat the shit out of him like he did last time, that match wouldn't produce very well for the ticket purchasing patrons.
I was just reading a quote from Cody. I think it must have been in a recent interview where he was talking about different visions for AEW and how he wanted JCP. He wanted Jim Crockett Promotions and big angles and big promos. And the Bucks and Omega wanted Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. That didn't work for Cody, not even coexisting in their universe. They had two different worlds on that TV show. If you take someone from the serious wrestling side, like a Cody, or in this case CM Punk, and you put him in with the guys who only want to do their thing, I think you're probably right. It's one of those things I remember saying years ago to someone from Epic Records, I really wish the Clash would reunite. And he said, no, you don't. It wouldn't be what you're visualizing in your head. It just wouldn't be that.
Yeah.
And this may be a case just like that.
That's one of the lessons you got to learn, is that sometimes even a match that the fans would want to see, if it's going to be as ugly as a goddamn pair of bowling shoes, you don't put it on because they get let down and everybody in the match comes out looking worse in their eyes than they did going into start, because something about those two individuals or opposing forces doesn't click with each other. It's apples and oranges, or peanut butter and fucking ice cream.
Well, speaking of peanut butter and ice cream, Mick Foley likes his ice cream, and Mick Foley was one of the wrestlers featured this week on A&E's WWE Rivals, The Undertaker versus Mankind.
And I was looking forward to this, and it didn't let me down, because they didn't get to work for years and years like Bobo and the Sheik, right? But what they did was so tremendous and so well remembered. And we've covered the Hell in a Cell match ad infinitum, and we've talked about Mick taking those bumps was a blessing and a curse. It made him memorable, but at the same time, it gave other people the idea that if they did it, they'd be Mick Foley. which couldn't be further from the truth because everybody overlooks his intelligence and psychology and verbal ability and physical ability and every other thing he has, besides I fall down a lot off high things. But again, I loved watching this rivalry because of the footage and because of the comments from people who were involved. The host and the panel are extraneous and not connected in any way to the subject. And they're being forced in, to this thing like a square peg in a round hole. And, they get right into it since this is not a biography. We didn't get to see, Mick's Long Island roots again or whatever the fuck. But they got right into the deal with pitching Mick Foley to Vince was challenging. And Jim Ross led the charge. And Bruce was all in favor of Mick. And of course I was. And Vince was never sold or convinced even when he signed him. And remember, I think he told JR one time, you're going to see what happens when a talent breaks your heart, pal. Because he just looked at Mick and he looked like shit because he had never seen Cactus Jack. And he didn't know what the fuck was going on there. And we knew it wasn't just about bumps, but that's what got the attention, but that he could talk and he was a person with a lot going on. So I would love to say that the dungeon videos with George did it, but actually, as we've told people, the sit down with JR is what really turned Vince McMahon on to Cactus. But the whole Mankind the Mutilator thing, that, Mick jumped in and was able to change around to where it could be palatable enough for him to do, because that's the thing we've said so many times. When Vince hits you with an idea, if you're not quick enough and smart enough to make that idea not only better for him, but what you're willing to do, then you're fucked. But he did become Mankind, and they had the dungeon set built at the studio in Stamford. Because Mankind is going to be in the cellar, like the fucking serial killer movies and there's so many influences that everybody recognizes from what Vince was thinking about this thing. And I said, well, if we're going to put you in a fucking dungeon with the dark and the gloom, you need a rat, don't you? So I brought George to the studio. And George, I'll have you know, he was a real trooper. Did not ask for a bonus that day or even any extra feed or water or anything. He did the shoot, and Mick loved it. George was an affectionate little thing, and he would never bite you. He'd only nibble on your little fingertips, but he liked to chew on sheets. When we'd take him on the road, sometimes he would chew holes in the sheets at the hotel. But nevertheless, so George Cornette, my pet rat, was in the cellar with Mankind. And, that's where you see Mick start taking this shit that could be really corny, no pun intended, really cheesy, no pun intended with George, or just bad. But he was so smart and so articulate and came up with a way to make it. You almost bought that this guy, if he doesn't live in a fucking dungeon cellar somewhere, he needs to be. And that's what not only started getting people interested in Cactus and Mankind and the WWF, but started getting Vince interested in him too, because he started seeing him taking this shit and making something out of it rather than just doing exactly what he was told. And that does get over with Vince. He likes you to do as you're told, but he likes you to take the shit that you are told to do and make it better while still doing the shit he likes, if that makes any sense. And Bruce and I were doing the TV formats at the time. So when they show the footage, like, the angle where he attacked Undertaker and dropped the elbow off the apron and everything, Vince didn't know what Cactus could do or not do, or the move or anything about. So Bruce and I did. And when we'd format shit or make a suggestion to Vince or whatever, we'd just suggest that Mick do shit that he already did. And Vince said, you think he can do it? Oh, we're pretty sure he can do it. Okay. And, and then that's when obviously shit stain was not a factor on the creative team in 1996 at this point in time, or elsewise, by the time they got to the Boiler Room Brawl, he would have had fucking naked strippers in the goddamn broom closets coming out with mops or whatever. But the Boiler Room Brawl was Vince's genesis of it, where he said this guy lives in the bowels of the building. He used to make a joke, and are we going back to the bowels? Because whenever he wanted to put mankind somewhere, he'd say, they're in the bowels of the building. But so he said if he lives in dungeons and cellars and bowels, he'll be in the boiler room. We'll have the fight in the boiler room. All right, so we ran with it. It's Vince's idea, but it was Undertaker and Mick setting it up and executing it, not like the hokey fucking, like the game show set bullshit that they come up with today, where everything's obviously set up as fake. It's not a real concession stand, or it's not a real catering room, or it's whatever. Taker and Mick went through the goddamn building and figured out what they could do based on what was really there, which is the whole point of wrestling. And the reason why tables and chairs were used in wrestling from this, because they were there. And I remember that, and by the way, that night at SummerSlam in Cleveland, August of 96, at the Gund Arena, not only was that the first ever Boiler Room Brawl, but it's the first time that I ever went to a Buffalo Wild Wings. Had never seen one before, I'll have you know, till after we got out of there.
Are you a fan?
I loved it. The last few times I've had it over the last couple of years, and of course I've been going to a lot of restaurants, their portions had gotten smaller and their fucking service not as good. But back then they were fucking wonderful. So anyway, and they did, again, this was one of the first times that Vince started out, say, well, I guess the precursor of a cinematic match, say, well, we'll pre-tape the fight in case it doesn't go well or whatever, and then they'll fight live into the arena, and they matched it up, and it was tough for Taker because he had to be bleeding from all the same places. But if you notice in that one, once they got out in the arena, that was the big moment. Cactus took the Nestea plunge bump off the apron there, like he did in the match with Mascaras in 90 at the Clash, but this time was on a much bigger stage. He was already in the main event, but it was still a big match. And that was and Bruce, you know how Bruce loved the Undertaker and loved the whole gimmick and Paul Bearer and the whole 9 yards. Well, that was Bruce shepherded that turn of Paul Bearer on the Undertaker when he withheld the urn and then whacked him with it and blah, blah, blah. So then, again, that set up the Buried Alive match in Indianapolis in October, and I don't know whose idea that was, what the genesis of it was. I've never heard Taker or Mick claim that they had the idea from scratch. I first heard Bruce and Vince talking about it when I went to the house for writing day. I didn't know, I wouldn't have booked it because I didn't know how you could do that or that we were allowed to spend that much money. I'd just been on the booking committee for 9 months. I didn't know we were allowed to fucking spend that much money on wild hairs of ideas. But the funny part was when we were talking about it, and the deal was Vince says, no, it's going to be, you got to leave the ring and go to the separate graveyard area in the arena. And then the open grave will be there, and you throw the guy in and cover him up. And I'd asked at Vince's living room table, I said, wait a minute. I said, how long is it going to take to cover him up? And Bruce at that point was, no. He just has to cover him a little bit, not fill the whole hole up. So we'll just till the dirt's over the top of him, and then that's good. Well, goddamn, that would have taken one motherfucker 15 minutes. Not one of us has ever been a professional grave digger, right? So we had no frame of reference. And that was I'd even said, should we try to run through this? Oh, it'd be okay. That was the night also, I've told this story, that the big severe thunderstorms came through the Northeast, and and delayed one of the World Series games, and it was a bin. And I had gotten out of the Northeast in my car driving, because I wasn't going to fly through that weather. It was being forecast, but Vince and JR, Bruce, everybody else tried to fly, and they didn't get into Indianapolis until 5 o'clock the next morning. I was asleep in the hotel by the time they showed up. But maybe that's why they run through so many things now, because it never occurred to everyone involved until he was trying to do it, that as big as that hole was, it was going to take him forever by himself to even get dirt over Undertaker. And that's what Vince is at the gorilla position. So every heel they could find that was still dressed, go out and help him cover up the Undertaker. And then we had come up with the finish at Vince's house, because that's the spot in every horror movie, right? So it's not, once we're going in that direction, it's not hard to figure out. As soon as Undertaker loses, he's buried alive. The bell rings, the gongs or whatever, the lightning bolt, because that was the pyro guy out of a horror movie. And can the hand come up out of the grave? So we called the guy that at the time was doing the special effects, and I don't know what his background was or whether he'd been in real television. He was a very secretive guy. He even had a gimmick telephone number that he only gave out to certain people, and the machine, as I recall, had no outgoing message. Just if you heard a beep, you knew to leave a message. The guy's name was Richie Posner. And they called him and said, "Can this be done?" "Oh, yeah." So there was some kind of chamber underneath that once they supposedly somehow they got the dirt over him or whatever, that then they could open up a side door that he could roll into. And that's how underneath the tombstone, there was a pocket that he could be in. So when all the dirt was over it and the lightning bolt hit, that he could reach his hand up from the empty area that he was in and it would go through the thing. And it was okay. And that's, in those days, this was the first start of using special effects and gimmicks. So in a lot of cases, we didn't know whether it was going to work until it actually happened. And at some points, we didn't know. I sound like Dutch Mantel when they first made him the booker in Florida. He had a real hot run going, but they said, well, no, it wasn't the record house in this town but we had raised prices. And he said, well, hell, nobody told me I was allowed to raise the prices. Nobody told us for a while we were allowed to spend this much fucking money. And then by the time that we knew that, then Shitstain had come along, and then all of a sudden they're ordering Partridge Family buses for fucking no reason. But nevertheless, I will stop here to ask you, Brian, if you think that the people remember that it was almost 2 years between their 96 program and they got back together in 98 for Hell in a Cell.
I hadn't thought of it in that way, but I guess I hadn't thought that it was 2 years. No.
Because that's the thing. They worked this program for several months in 96 and then were apart and got back together as opponents in 98 for the Hell in a Cell and that little run. And this rivalry has lived on and lasted all those years when Mick was pretty much done as a full-time wrestler and out of the WWE as an active competitor by 2001, 2? And they had not been actively working this. So this was really 2 little short runs that were just so incredible. Because it was Yokozuna was probably the first time that Taker had an opponent in the WWF where in the ring he could do the shit he could do. Because, Vince, as we've talked about with the first few years, Giant Gonzalez and the big monsters and the heavy guys, and it wasn't until Yokozuna that Taker could really do the big shit that he could do, and then you couldn't do it with Yoko very long because he couldn't keep that pace up at that size. But with Cactus, he wasn't as big but he was crazy. And his shit was definitely believable as being damaging to himself or others. And the promos, it was the first time, I think, really, that the Undertaker's opponent could talk for himself rather than having the manager, right? So this was an in-ring revelation for people with what Undertaker was. They knew how good Cactus Jack was. Only Vince and Kevin Dunn didn't know that. But nobody knew how good the Undertaker was until he was able to work with a guy like this.
When do you think Vince started taking the Mick Foley?
With they've talked about the sit-down promo with JR was part of it. And then just being around Mick and seeing not only his work ethic, but that he made everything better. And that what an intelligent guy. And then you find out there's never a fucking problem. He's going to be early, not late. He's not on any substances. I mean, it was when you think about it, of all the years that Vince had already been running that company and been burned by people over a variety of things, if he made a list of everything I don't want a motherfucker that works for me to ever do again, Mick Foley was probably the only person that fit that fucking list and didn't even try. So anyway, and the Hell in a Cell meant something at that point. They'd had one of them, Taker and Michaels, debut of Kane. It had been protected.
Debut of Cell.
The debut of the Hell in a Cell itself. And then 9 months later, we're going to have another one. Remember what happened the last time Undertaker was in a cell, blah, blah, blah. But it was not only a forbidding structure, but a thing that would instantly draw money with main event guys in it because it hadn't been done and overdone, and there was still blood and there was still violence. So, and Mick, again, had the idea, he could take that bump, and he talked Vince into it. Again, I believe, because I don't think Vince understood what the fuck that he was listening to. Much like the curtain call. I think that he didn't fully have a grip on exactly what Mick was saying. I think he thought he'd hang on to the side and kind of fall off, or I don't know what the fuck. But anyway, the match highlights. What a performance. It still looked like a fight. There was not obvious cooperation on the stunts. It was before they started cleaning off the table and gimmicking it so it'd fall apart when you look sideways at it. And we've talked about, but it bears mentioning again, the dramatic return of Mick Foley to the match, to the ring, after being thrown off the top of the cell was planned. That was fine. That's exactly what was supposed to happen. And him climbing back up to the top and the crowd being insane and everything was, once he lived through that bump off the top of the cell, everything was going according to plan. And then the choke slam. Not only does the whole thing just instantly fly open under his fucking back, but the chair follows him on the way down and bashes his face in. That's where he ain't getting up. And Terry Funk was not supposed to go back out there at that point. And honestly, I don't even remember that all the rest of the people, agents and everybody, were supposed to go back out at that point. I think they were going out to see literally on the fly there if Mick was going to be able to get back up. And Terry's interaction with Undertaker there at that point was all ad-libbed to buy Cactus time to get his wits back about him. So that was all, it was just unfolding as it happened. None of that was called ahead of time. And our big concern, me and Bruce and Vince at the start, because I don't know if Bruce knew about it, sitting at Gorilla, I was never informed of it. But the biggest concern that anybody in the office had going into the Hell in a Cell match was Taker's, was it his foot or his ankle? What had he cracked? It wasn't like an ankle broken in two. He could walk on it. It was healing. It was a fractured bone. He had it taped up heavily.
Was it like Hawk? Was it like Hawk on the scaffold?
Something like that. And the thing that he was wondering about, and they didn't show this clip, but you can see it. twice he had a problem when he had to climb back down from that cage, getting down from the cage to the floor, and when he had to come through the top, it had given way and get into the cage with Cactus. When he dropped down that time and landed on his feet, if you watch the unedited match, you'll see him pull up instantly and start limping, Taker, from just dropping into the ring. So we thought, okay, that had been our worry beforehand. Taker's injured. Can they get through with this match? And halfway in, we're worried, will Mick Foley fucking live through this? So, and then Taker says, go home. And Mick's got to do the thumbtack spot. And I loved Undertaker's response to it. We don't need the tacks, because they didn't need the tacks. But Cactus wanted to do the tacks. And this was his worst contribution to wrestling. He made the fucking stupid thumbtacks acceptable, where now we can't get rid of them. And as you recall, when he was in the back, this is the spot that he did not remember doing afterwards, because when we got him set down in some air and tried to give him oxygen to, get his breath, he said, Corny, did I do the thumbtack spot? I said, they're sticking in your fucking arms. But anyway, and that was true. He said, I can't be on 2 stretchers in one night, because they were going to wheel him out. And he got up and limped out, etc. But from the end of the program, we have come to learn that he has come to terms with the Hell in a Cell match being his Citizen Kane. And that's fine, because we all always told him, you can't top the bump off the cage, so don't try. It will be replayed and remembered forever. You're not going to top it. And, as we said, he knew at that point that his body was going to break down, before that it actually did. But that was 1998, where in the summertime. Was Mick a full-time wrestler another 4 years? Was it? He started part-time, and then he was done except for special appearances. So it's not like he had a ton of time and a ton of variety of opponents to try to top this thing anyway.
Well, that was A&E's Rivals.
No fucking counterpoint on your part? You didn't see anything wrong with this? Don't want to pick at anybody?
I mean, there's very little to say at this point, just because we've seen so much coverage of this feud and that match over the years. I feel like there's very little in the nitpick.
Did you spot my appearance?
At the very end of the Mankind video, when the dungeon video? Was that your voice or no?
Okay, you got it. Yeah, okay. Because they showed one of the takes with George in the dungeon, and then he does his take, and then they have the 3 or 4 seconds of silence, and then you say, what do I say after every time I hear somebody do a good promo? Excellent! Excellent!
I'll say something that you won't agree with.
What?
I'm actually not crazy about those dungeon promos, just because it kind of goes against what I like in wrestling, which is some sort of realism. Why is he there and there's a cameraman there?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I've never been a fan of those promos. And they came right after what were the best promos of the previous year, which were Cactus Jack and ECW.
Oh, of course. But since Vince had never seen any of that shit, he wanted to put him in the dungeon. So now what am I going to do being paid by a billionaire, old billionaire Vince?
He wasn't a billionaire.
He wasn't a billionaire then, but he had more money than I did. So what was I going to do being paid by millionaire Vince when one of my not only good friends, but one of my favorite wrestlers finally gets a chance to come into company, and they're going to stick him in a fucking fake dungeon and have him cut a promo? Am I going to sit by and watch him twist slowly in the wind? Or am I going to bring him a rat? And I brought him a rat. And I firmly believe that the presence of George Cornette that day, along with Mick Foley's outstanding verbal ability, turned those promos from a fucking guy in a weird outfit in a fake dungeon into something that made Mankind a little spookier than the average bear. But no, I wouldn't have put him in a dungeon either. But since he was there, I brought George.
Well, that was a very spooky edition of WWE Rivals, produced by WWE for A&E.
For us, by us.
Jim, well, that's FUBU. I wouldn't associate them with WWE, but...
Oh, that's right. WWE was associated with FUBAR.
Couple questions before we get out of here. This was from the Cult of Cornette Facebook group by Luis Tenorio. When and how did The Undertaker become such a revered figure in the locker room, seemingly taking Andre's place? I recall Kevin Nash saying that he told Vince it would be an honor to lose to The Undertaker at WrestleMania 12, which was just over 5 years after his debut at the end of 1990, which seems really fast for someone to command that much respect in the business. So answer that question, but also, what was it like when you first got there in 93? Did The Undertaker already have that aura, that respect?
Well, now, wait a minute. Nash told Vince that it would be an honor to lose to Undertaker at WrestleMania 12?
According to this question here, yes.
It wasn't, no, I guess 13 was in 97. I was going to say maybe Nash said that because he wasn't even working there anymore, but it was 13 in 97, 12 in 96. I've never heard Kevin Nash say it would be an honor to do a job for anybody. I'm not saying he didn't say it in private conversation with the guy that was paying him money. You know, with Mark, I honestly wasn't there the first, 2 years he was in the WWF. But I came in summer of 93. He'd only been there for 2 years, and still he had the gravitas in the locker room and the perception of the other guys as not only a leader, but also a main event guy, a guy drawing money. And when you look back at 93, that was the start of Vince's rebuilding period from the Hogan era and et cetera. And he didn't have a lot of top dependable guys. Yokozuna was drawing some money.
And he was new.
Hart,
and he was new. Yokozuna.
And he was new. Brett was still there, and Brett was getting over, especially he got over in Europe and the international markets before he would achieve his top status in the United States. And there was Undertaker. And Taker, even when he wasn't champion, was looked at as the guy that drew the money in the WWF. And, Luger never made it to that point. When I went in to manage Yoko, he was working with Luger. But by that November, Yoko was working with Taker. And the aura was different. The interest was different. I managed Yokozuna against a lot of different people, from job guys to guys on house shows and TV matches, whatever. The aura was completely different when it was against either Bret Hart or The Undertaker. The fans knew this is big. The crowds were bigger. The houses were bigger. Those were the guys. And Taker was looked at as a no-nonsense fucking guy. Don't fuck around. Be professional. And he had the anti-clique, his group of, guys like with the Godwins and fucking, Fatu of the Samoan contingent, Fuji Yoko. Those guys that weren't ever going to fuck with anybody or conspire behind people's back and wanted to go to the fucking Ribera or have beers or whatever afterwards. That was the anti-clique. Those were all and that's where not only Undertaker got the reputation of being a locker room leader, but just being a guy that was one of the boys, as opposed to the rapidly developing egos of the other little group. So they looked up to him early on, not only because of the person he was in the locker room, but because he was a money drawer and a leader in the ring and a face of the promotion. So he had a lot of respect from everybody, and it didn't take him long to get it.
Jim, this next question from the official Cult of Cornette Facebook group was sent by Ben Token.
So what you're saying is, if you join the new official Cult of Cornette Facebook group, you've got the inside pipeline to getting a lot of questions asked on this program.
I'm specifically not saying that because I don't know if we're going to do this every time, and I don't know how many of the questions we'll get to use because
the questions haven't been bad so far, but now things could change.
This was sent by Ben Token. I want to know.
Now, come on. Are these made up names?
Tokin. I want to know Jim's opinion on the back rake and any history of it being used from Arkansas. I think he means he's from Arkansas, not the history of the back rake in Arkansas.
The back rake from Arkansas the back rake, it's a classic heel move. The fucking babyface is selling, and he's kind of staggering away, trying to get space and get his wind, and the heel's behind him and just plants his hands at the top of his shoulders with those fingernails and just rakes right down the goddamn back. Oh, and the babyface screams. And it's a classic old heel move. And some people like it and some people don't like it. One of the people who was in a habit of doing it as part of getting aggressive and kind of very prickish heel heat on you, where he'd put a thumb in your eye and he'd rake your fucking back and then he'd pull your fucking hair and he'd put his hand around your throat, was Dennis Condrey. And that flew for quite some time. And then we went to Mid-South as the Midnight Express. And Dennis does the same thing to Ricky Morton in a match that Watts watched on tape. And Ricky Morton sold it incredibly, because when you would give Ricky the back rake, he would arch his back. He would have a look on his face like tears were coming to his eyes. He would drop to his knees, and then he would run quickly on his knees while his hands were up like a cat's paws, going, ah! He could sell a back rake for 15 seconds. Watts saw it, fined Dennis Condrey $50. He said, the next time you do a back rake, I will fine you $50 again unless I see bloody furrows running down the man's back. He didn't like it because he didn't believe it, because it didn't draw any blood. So one thing you do somewhere, it's fine. The next thing you do it, you get fined for it. It depends on who's in charge.
What do you think of a babyface using the back rake, like Hogan?
Well, that's just stupid, and also it did look kind of phony when he did it. But yeah, no. Then the babyface, if you're a good heel and you have done what you should have done to the babyface during the heat, then if he's making his comeback and gets you with a back rake, you haven't done enough to him.
Jim, this question from the official Cult of Cornette Facebook group was sent by Scott Lawson. Would Orange Cassidy as a heel work? Going from cool Gen X guy to arrogant jerk Gen X who mocks his opponents with the pocket spots and kicks.
No, because I don't know how many times I have to say this, because it's phony on the surface of it. He is making a mockery of, making fun of, taking the piss out of, whatever analogy you want to fucking use, of what he's actually doing. Who has success making fun of and or pointing out the bad points of whatever their field of endeavor is? He's obviously showing people and mocking that wrestling is a phony bunch of bullshit, which they're already well enough aware to begin with. He has no look. He has no charisma. He has no promo. He has no psychology, because all he does is what a trained chimpanzee can do. He does his little fucking unfunny one-note jokes with the shin kicks and hands in the pockets, and then he bursts out into an array of all the finest indie-rific fucking wrestling moves that aren't really wrestling moves and don't look like that they could be done without obvious cooperation from the other child he's working with. He's phony on a basic visual, visceral level. He is a fraud, a charlatan, a con man, a carpetbagger, if you will.
Sounds like a great heel.
Except he's not in any way interesting, because he has no personality, because he doesn't give a fuck. So according to what his gimmick is supposed to, he's a slacker. He doesn't give a fuck. Well, I don't give a fuck about him.
What if he
Because he doesn't give a fuck.
What if he can explain it? What if he comes out there and finally says, you people don't understand how stupid I think you are. I've been doing this for a few years. In reality, I'm a drug dealer. I'm a bad guy.
That would be more than he has spoken in the last 3 years.
Well, he has...
No, the whole thing doesn't, because then he still looks like some fucking hatchet head with a fucking haircut from his mother and wearing blue jeans and walking around, I don't know, walking his fucking dog. There's nothing special about this guy. He has no talent. He has no charisma, no personality, no gimmick that anybody would understand or want to see. And he makes wrestling not only look like a bunch of jack-offs, but beats you in the face with the fact that it's phony. And in years gone by, people in the business would have had the same response to this fucking clown as they did Eddie Mansfield. They wouldn't let him around them. They wouldn't want to see him. And if they did have anything to say to him or to do to him, it would be to kick him in the fucking nuts and throw him off a bridge. But that's when people in wrestling had self-respect and respect for their business. And now everybody hugs this fucking guy and thinks it's great. He's so funny. Yeah, he is. That's why you're not over either. That's why your company's not over, because you got idiots like this in it, making people think that everybody can do this shit. It's all a bunch of horse shit. So fuck you and anybody that looks like you.
All right, well, our final question here this week, Jim, sent to the official Cult of Cornette Facebook group from Devin Pettiford.
Wait a minute. I thought you were going to say pedophile. I was going to say we covered that earlier.
How dare you? Will you leave the listener alone? Devin Pettiford. Do you think...
All right, what do you want to know, Mr. Pettifor?
Do you think if Sting went to the WWF instead of Warrior, and Warrior went to WCW, would they have risen to as high a level as they did?
Oh, good God, no. Good God, no. Sting would have become a star in the WWF. Warrior would have become a fucking professional chiropractor after WCW it would have actually been Jim Crockett Promotions at that point. He wouldn't have lasted 3 weeks in Jim Crockett Promotions. From what I've never had the misfortune of dealing with him much on a personal basis, except for that one famous lunch and afternoon visit. But no, he couldn't work or talk to the standards of the talent in Crockett Promotions. He didn't have the attitude to want to learn. He would not have been in any way babied or coddled or pushed past his ability like he was with Vince, because Dusty nor Jimmy Crockett nor anybody else in the Carolinas gave a fuck about bodybuilders or cared what his body looked like, whereas that was what Vince saw to make him the next guy. And that's why Vince did it, because of the physique alone. And, conversely, Sting would have taken much better to the WWF environment, because he was especially in those days, straight-laced guy, a professional, kind of sort of did, what he was told, was humble, wanted to learn. But he wouldn't have gotten over as, I don't think, to the extent that Warrior did, because by that point, Vince would not have wanted to push Sting like he did Warrior, because Sting had lost his size, had concentrated on being a wrestler, and was still in great shape and looked athletic. But remember, when Sting first got into business, he was almost as big as Warrior was during Warrior's WWF days. He was jacked up to the gills too. But whereas Watts told Sting, I think you've got a future in this business, the other guy he fired and sent to fucking Dallas because, he didn't want him. Sting started learning. Warrior stuck on the same path. Going to work on my body. My wrestling's going to be the shits, and my interviews same way. That's what Vince wanted. He wanted the body. Everybody else wanted Sting because Sting was the one learning how to work. So Sting got over better in WCW than he would have in the WWF, and Warrior definitely got over better in the WWF than he would have in Crockett Promotions, because I don't think that anybody in Crockett Promotions would have put up with Jim Hellwig in terms of personality or in-ring talent or lack thereof for more than a couple months, and they'd have just run him off.
Well, speaking of running people off, that's the end of our questions.
Have we done it yet?
I don't know if we ever do it. It's a sad thing. All right, well, with that, the drive-thru has closed. All right. That's our song portion right there. Of course, the Drive-Thru returns next week wherever you find your favorite podcast, and the Jim Cornette Experience this weekend wherever you find your favorite podcast. Get ready for the AEW Revolution Review, the Jim Cornette Experience, and Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru. Get access to the archive. Going back to the very beginning, in 2013, patreon.com/Cornette. For $5 a month, you get access to the archive. Patreon.com/Cornette. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette. It'll come right up. And subscribe today as we approach 350,000 subscribers. Full episodes, clips of episodes, omnibus collections, all with the very popular Travis Heckel artwork. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. You can follow Jim on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, or available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And don't forget about the wrestling news. Download it every day directly from thewrestlingnews.com, or look for Arcadian Vanguard's The Wrestling News wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Cornette's Collectibles at JimCornette.com. What's going on, Jim?
This Saturday, March the 4th, noon Eastern, get your cameos, the last ones we're going to be presenting for some time. Don't be disheartened if you miss out, because then you'll feel like you fell in a puddle of goo. And won't that be disheartening when it could happen to you in a puddle of goo?
At JimCornette.com. The Drive-Thru is brought to you by the law office of Stephen P. New.
Boo-hoo.
888.
You fell in a puddle of goo.
Don't fall in goo. Call Stephen P. New. 888-692-8084. Get even with Stephen. This is degenerated. And newlawoffice.com. But until this weekend on The Experience, and next week right back here in the Drive-Thru, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!
Where's the Goo Goo Girls?